The scent of decay lingered over the Shadowcrest kingdom like a shroud. Where once verdant forests had stretched toward the heavens, only skeletal remains of ancient trees now clawed at the perpetually gray sky. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something, perhaps for death, perhaps for salvation. This was the burden of King Alaric's reign, a visible manifestation of the curse that flowed through his veins. From atop the northern watchtower of his obsidian fortress, Alaric gazed across his blighted domain. His massive frame cast a long shadow in the weak afternoon light. Even in his human form, there was something distinctly lupine about him. The predatory stillness, the amber eyes that missed nothing, the sense of barely contained power. The guards stationed nearby maintained a careful distance, their fear of their king a tangible presence. A cool wind swept across the barren landscape, carrying with it whispers from distant villages, hunger, desperation. His people suffered, and each day their suffering was another weight upon his shoulders. "Your Majesty." Alaric did not turn at the sound of Gideon's voice. His captain of the guard knew better than to approach too closely. 20 years of loyal service had taught the man caution, if nothing else. "The council awaits," Gideon continued, his gruff voice steady despite the underlying tension. "They wish to discuss the harvest projections." "There is nothing to discuss," Alaric replied, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "The southern fields have failed again. The eastern ones barely produced enough to feed that region. Tell me, Gideon, how does a king rule over dust and ashes?" The old warrior said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of a man who had seen too many winters, too many battles. "The same way you have always ruled, my king, one day at a time, with strength and honor." Alaric finally turned, a bitter smile twisting his features. In the fading light, the scar that ran from his temple to jaw stood out starkly against his skin, a reminder of the Westland Rebellion 5 years past. Not for the first time, the king wondered if his subjects would have preferred he fell in that battle. "Strength and honor," he repeated quietly. "Fine words for a dying land." His mind drifted to the ancient scrolls hidden in his private chambers, tales of his ancestors and the god they had angered. The Blackwood Forest, once sacred to the old deities, had been burned by Alaric's great-grandfather to expand hunting grounds. The fire had spread far beyond control, consuming not just trees, but the ancient shrine at the forest's heart. The deity's wrath had been swift and terrible, a curse upon the bloodline that grew stronger with each generation. Now, with Alaric, the curse had reached its zenith. His touch brought decay to living things. His presence made the very soil infertile. His kingdom withered around him, and he was powerless to stop it. The memory of the Westland Rebellion surged unbidden into his consciousness. The rain had been relentless that day, turning the battlefield to mud. The rebels, led by the charismatic Lord Drayton, had believed Alaric weakened by the curse, unable to lead his men effectively. They had been wrong. Alaric had shifted to his wolf form, larger than any alpha had a right to be, his midnight fur absorbing what little light remained on that gray day. His howl had sent shivers through friend and foe alike. What followed was not a battle, but a slaughter. Alaric had torn through the rebel ranks, his massive jaws crushing armor and bone with equal ease. Blood had mixed with rain and mud, and when it was over, Alaric stood alone among the carnage, his fur matted with gore, his amber eyes blazing with primal fury. It was the last time any had openly challenged his rule. Fear, it seemed, was a more effective tool than love. "The tribute ships have returned from the coastal provinces," Gideon said, pulling Alaric back to the present. "The fishing vessels report diminishing catches. The seas near our shores grow as barren as the land." Another consequence of the curse, another failure. "And what of the Crescent Moon Pack?" Alaric asked. "Has Lord Magnus sent word?" "Nothing, Your Majesty. Their tribute is 3 weeks overdue." A growl rumbled deep in Alaric's chest. The Crescent Moon territory was one of the few regions still relatively fertile, protected by distance from the worst effects of the curse. Magnus, their Alpha Lord, had always been punctual with tributes before, an ambitious man who understood the value of staying in the king's good graces. "Prepare my personal guard," Alaric commanded. "We ride for Crescent Moon territory at dawn. I will collect what is owed personally." "As you wish, Your Majesty." Gideon bowed and retreated, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Alone again, Alaric turned back to the desolate view. In the far distance, beyond the edges of his cursed influence, he could just make out the green smudge of forests, a reminder of what his kingdom had once been, what it could never be again while he lived. 100 generations of kings had searched for a cure. 100 generations had failed. Now the burden fell to him, and time was running out. Without fertile lands, his people would starve. Without a successor, for what alpha female would bond with a king whose touch brought only death, his line would end. As twilight settled over the bleak landscape, Alaric descended from the tower, his heavy footfalls echoing through the empty corridors. Servants and courtiers pressed themselves against walls as he passed, eyes downcast, breath held. None dared meet his gaze, none dared speak unless spoken to. This was his curse as well, isolation more complete than any prison, power without warmth, a throne without legacy. The council meeting was brief and grim. The Lord spoke of failing crops and hungry villages, of migrations to the border regions where the curse's effect was weaker. They suggested importing more food from neighboring kingdoms, though such transactions came at increasingly exorbitant costs. Through it all, Alaric sat still as stone upon his obsidian throne, absorbing their fears and complaints like the lifeless soil absorbed rain, without producing anything in return. When they had finished, he announced his decision to personally collect the Crescent Moon tribute. The council exchanged nervous glances but offered no objections. "Perhaps, Your Majesty," ventured Lord Thorne, an elderly beta with silver threading through his dark beard, "a diplomatic envoy would be more appropriate. Your presence might be overwhelming." What he meant, of course, was that Alaric's presence would accelerate the decay of even the Crescent Moon's relatively healthy lands. The king fixed the old counselor with a steady gaze until the man lowered his eyes. "I will not have Lord Magnus believe the crown is weak," Alaric stated flatly. "The tribute will be collected, and boundaries will be reinforced." No one dared argue further. Later, in the solitude of his chambers, Alaric poured himself a generous measure of whiskey from the crystal decanter, one of the few luxuries he allowed himself. The liquor burned pleasantly as he swallowed, a momentary respite from the constant weight of his existence. His quarters were sparse for a king, a massive bed with dark linens, several bookshelves filled with ancient texts, a large desk covered with maps and reports. No tapestries adorned the walls, no rugs covered the stone floors. Decorations withered in his presence, flowers turned to dust within hours. A large window overlooked the kingdom, and Alaric found himself drawn to it once more. Night had fallen completely now, and the moon, just past full, cast its cold light over the desolate landscape. In another life, he might have shifted and run beneath that moon, feeling the earth beneath his paws, the wind in his fur. But those days were long past. Now, even in wolf form, his presence killed the very grass he trod upon. From a hidden compartment in his desk, Alaric withdrew an ancient scroll, the parchment yellowed and brittle with age. The prophecy had been in his family for generations, passed from king to king, its meaning debated by countless scholars. Written in the old tongue, it spoke of a time when light shall be born of shadow, healing what has been broken. Some had interpreted this as the end of the curse, others as the final destruction of the kingdom. Alaric himself was uncertain. Prophecies were tricky things, often revealing their true meaning only after they had been fulfilled. Still, in his darkest moments, like this one, the ancient words offered a sliver of hope. With a weary sigh, he returned the scroll to its hiding place. Hope was a luxury for those with futures. For now, he had a kingdom to maintain and a tributary lord to remind of his obligations. Dawn arrived with sheets of gray rain that turned the castle courtyard to mud. Alaric mounted his massive black war horse, one of the few animals that could bear his weight and seemed resistant to his curse. Perhaps because the beast was already so ill-tempered that the curse found nothing to corrupt. Behind him, 20 of his elite guard prepared their own mounts, their faces grim beneath rain-slicked helmets. Gideon approached, leading his own horse. "The men are ready, Your Majesty. We can reach Crescent Moon territory by nightfall if we ride hard." Alaric nodded, pulling his heavy cloak tighter against the chill. "Then let us not waste daylight." The journey was arduous, the road deteriorating the closer they got to the castle. Another consequence of the curse. Infrastructure crumbled faster near the seat of Alaric's power. They passed through villages where hollow-eyed peasants watched from doorways, their faces etched with hunger and despair. Children with distended bellies stared at the procession with dull, incurious eyes. This was the true face of his kingdom, not the political machinations of his council or the tribute negotiations with outlying pacts. This was his failure made manifest. As they rode, Alaric felt the familiar weight of responsibility bearing down upon him. These were his people, their suffering his burden to bear. Yet what could he do when his very existence poisoned the land they depended on? By late afternoon, the landscape began to change. The barren ground gave way to scrubby vegetation, then to proper fields. They had reached the edge of Alaric's curse shadow, the boundary where his influence waned enough to allow life to flourish. In the distance, the forests of Crescent Moon territory spread across the horizon, a vibrant green that made Alaric's heart ache with something like envy. The border post was manned by a contingent of Magnus's guards, who blanched visibly when they recognized the king and his retinue. Word was sent ahead as they passed through, ensuring that Magnus would have no excuse for being unprepared for this royal visit. The Crescent Moon village was the largest settlement in the territory, home to over 2,000 werewolves of various ranks. As Alaric's procession wound through the main street, silence fell like a shroud. Villagers pressed back against buildings, parents clutching children to their sides, all eyes downcast in the presence of their king. Fear. Always fear. Alaric had grown accustomed to it, had even encouraged it at times, but today it tasted bitter in his mouth. Lord Magnus's hall stood on a low hill overlooking the village, a sprawling wooden structure decorated with the carved crescent moon sigil of his pack. As Alaric dismounted, the hall's massive doors swung open, and Magnus himself emerged, flanked by his advisors and guards. The Crescent Moon Alpha was a powerfully built man with a shock of red hair and a meticulously groomed beard. His green eyes betrayed a momentary flash of alarm before settling into a carefully neutral expression. He dropped to one knee, fist over heart, in the traditional salute. "King Alaric," he said, voice carrying across the courtyard, "what an unexpected honor! Had I known of your Majesty's visit, I would have prepared a proper welcome." "The proper welcome would have been your tribute, delivered on time," Alaric replied coldly. "Rise, Lord Magnus. We have much to discuss." Magnus led the king and his senior guards into the hall, where a hasty feast was being arranged. The smells of roasting meat and fresh bread filled the air, making Alaric acutely aware of how different this place was from his own sterile castle. "I must apologize for the delay in tribute, Your Majesty," Magnus said smoothly as servants scurried about setting tables. "We've had some difficulties with the harvest this season. Unexpected rains damaged some crops. I was just about to send a messenger explaining the situation." A lie, and not a particularly convincing one. Alaric had seen the storehouses as they rode in, bulging with grain. The fields they had passed showed no signs of damage. "Indeed," Alaric said, letting the word hang between them like a drawn blade. The feast that followed was a tense affair, with Magnus alternating between obsequious flattery and nervous glances at his advisors. Alaric ate little, though the food was excellent. He was more interested in the interactions among Magnus's inner circle, the whispered conversations, the meaningful looks. Something was amiss in Crescent Moon territory, something beyond a late tribute. As the meal concluded, Magnus called for entertainment. A group of musicians set up in the corner of the hall, but before they could begin, shouting erupted outside. The hall's doors burst open, and one of Alaric's guards stumbled in, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Your Majesty," he gasped. "An ambush. "At the Eastern Guardhouse. They've taken the supply wagons and killed 3 of our men." Alaric rose to his feet, his amber eyes shifting to the molten gold of his wolf form as rage built within him. "Explain, Lord Magnus." The Alpha Lord's face had drained of color. I know nothing of this, Your Majesty. Some rogue elements, perhaps. Bandits have been troubling the eastern borders for months." Another lie. Alaric could smell the deception rolling off him in waves. "Secure the hall," he commanded Gideon. "No one leaves." As his guards moved to block the exits, Magnus's men reached for their weapons. The situation teetered on the edge of violence until Magnus raised his hand, stopping his men. "There's no need for bloodshed, Your Majesty," he said. "A misunderstanding, nothing more. I'm sure we can resolve this matter peacefully." Alaric's patience, never abundant, had reached its limit. "The tribute, now. Double the usual amount, to compensate for the delay and the lives of my men. You have 1 hour, Lord Magnus, before I consider this an act of rebellion." Magnus swallowed visibly, but nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty. It will be arranged immediately." As the Crescent Moon Alpha hurried off, barking orders to his stewards, Alaric turned to Gideon. "Something larger is at play here. Have the men search the village. I want to know what Magnus is hiding." While the king's guard dispersed to carry out his orders, Alaric paced the hall, tension radiating from him in almost visible waves. The remaining villagers and servants pressed themselves against the walls, as if hoping to melt into the wood paneling. It was Gideon who discovered the truth, returning to the hall with a grim expression. "Your Majesty, you should see this." He led Alaric to a small structure behind the main hall, a hut that might once have been a storage building but had been converted into a dwelling of sorts. Inside, the space was sparse but clean, with a small hearth, a table, and several pallets on the floor. It would have been unremarkable except for one thing: the plants growing in crude pots along the single window, vibrant green herbs and flowers that had no business thriving in the dim light. "What is this place?" Alaric demanded. "The Omega Quarter," Gideon replied quietly, "where Magnus sends those he deems unworthy." A growl built in Alaric's chest. The treatment of Omegas varied widely across the kingdom. In his own castle, they were given respect appropriate to their rank and skills, though there were few enough of them. Some outlying packs, however, still clung to the old prejudices, viewing Omegas as little more than breeding stock or servants. "And these plants?" Alaric gestured to the thriving greenery, so out of place in the humble dwelling. The work of one Omega in particular, according to the villagers, a woman named Arya, formerly Magnus's chosen mate, until she bore him twin daughters instead of the sons he desired. He cast her out, declared her barren, though obviously a lie, and relegated her and her children to this place. The injustice of it stirred something in Alaric, a long-dormant sense of outrage. An alpha who would reject his mate and children over such a petty disappointment was no true alpha at all. "Where is this woman now?" he asked. "Gone, Your Majesty. The villagers say Magnus took her and her daughters this morning, before our arrival. No one knows where." A suspicion, dark and troubling, formed in Alaric's mind. The tribute is overdue. Magnus offers excuses, and suddenly an Omega with an unusual gift for nurturing life disappears. He turned to Gideon, his expression hardening. "Find Lord Magnus, now." The Alpha Lord was discovered attempting to flee through a hidden tunnel beneath his personal chambers. When dragged before Alaric, his arrogance had evaporated, replaced by naked fear. "Where is she?" Alaric demanded, his voice dangerously soft. Magnus licked his lips nervously. "I don't know who." Alaric moved with the speed of his wolf form, seizing the man by the throat and lifting him off the ground with one hand. "The Omega. Arya. Where?" "The Eastern Ridge," Magnus choked out, clawing ineffectually at Alaric's iron grip. "The old hunting lodge. But you're too late. The ritual would have begun at moonrise." "What ritual?" Alaric tightened his grip, causing Magnus to gasp for air. "A sacrifice. To the old gods. To end the curse." Cold dread washed over Alaric. He had heard of such rituals, blood magic from the darkest corners of their history, sacrificing an innocent to appease angry deities. It was forbidden throughout the kingdom, punishable by death. "You fool," Alaric snarled, throwing Magnus to the floor. "The old gods don't want blood. They want justice." Leaving the Crescent Moon Alpha to Gideon's custody, Alaric gathered his guards and rode for the eastern ridge. The moon was rising, a pale disk in the darkening sky, as they thundered through the forest. Time was against them. If the ritual had already begun. The old hunting lodge was a hulking shadow against the night sky, its windows glowing with firelight. As they approached, Alaric could hear chanting, a low, rhythmic drone that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "Surround the building," he ordered his men. "No one escapes." Dismounting, Alaric approached the lodge alone. Through a grimy window, he could see inside, a circle of robed figures around a stone altar. Atop it lay a woman, her wrists and ankles bound, her face turned away from him. Two small forms, children, were huddled in a cage in the corner, watching with terrified eyes. Without hesitation, Alaric kicked in the door. The chanting stopped abruptly as the robed figures whirled to face the intruder. "By order of the king," Alaric's voice filled the room like a physical force, "this ceremony is ended." The lead figure pushed back his hood, revealing the lined face of an elderly beta. "You have no authority here, cursed king. The old gods have spoken. A life of pure nurturing to balance a lineage of destruction. Her blood will end your curse and save the kingdom." "Her blood will do nothing except stain your hands with murder," Alaric replied coldly. "Surrender now, and your deaths may be quick." The old man's face twisted with fanatical certainty. "Kill him! For the salvation of our lands!" The robed figures drew hidden blades and rushed Alaric. It was a mistake. The king's curse might prevent him from nurturing life, but it did nothing to hinder his ability to end it. He shifted partially, claws extending from human hands, teeth lengthening into fangs, muscles swelling with primal power. The first attacker died with his throat torn out. The second lost his head to a single swipe of Alaric's claws. The third and fourth fell in quick succession, their blood spattering the rough wooden floors. The old beta tried to flee, but Alaric caught him at the door, slamming him against the wall with enough force to crack ribs. "The girl!" he snarled into the old man's terrified face. "What have you done to her?" "Nothing. Yet," the man wheezed. "The blood ritual requires her heart, while still beating." With a growl of disgust, Alaric snapped the man's neck and let the body crumple to the floor. Turning back to the altar, he approached the bound woman. Up close, he could see she was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark hair that fell in waves around her pale face. Her eyes, when they met his, showed no fear, only a fierce determination. "Are you here to finish what they started?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Alaric reached out and tore through her bindings with one claw. "No, I'm here to end it." As she sat up, rubbing her wrists, Alaric became aware of something strange. The air around this woman seemed different, clearer somehow. And the plants in pots around the altar, offerings to the old gods presumably, were lush and vibrant, their leaves turned toward her like flowers seeking the sun. "My daughters," she said urgently. "They took my daughters." Alaric nodded toward the cage. "There." She flew across the room, maternal instinct overpowering any fear or caution. The cage was simple iron, its lock no match for Alaric's strength. As it fell away, two small girls, identical twins with their mother's dark hair, rushed into her arms, sobbing with relief. "It's all right now," she soothed, clutching them close. "We're safe. We're going home." "Not to Crescent Moon territory," Alaric said. "Lord Magnus has betrayed the crown. His lands are forfeit." For the first time, genuine fear crossed the woman's face. "Then where? We have nowhere else." Before Alaric could answer, a commotion outside drew his attention. Gideon burst through the door, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, we have a situation. The Crescent Moon warriors have rallied behind Magnus's son. They're moving to attack the village, claiming we've abducted their lord." Alaric cursed under his breath. He should have killed Magnus when he had the chance, not left him in custody. "Prepare the men. We ride immediately." "And them?" Gideon nodded toward Arya and her daughters. Alaric studied the woman for a long moment. Something about her called to him, not just her beauty or the unusual aura that surrounded her, but something deeper, a resonance he couldn't explain. "They come with us," he decided, "under my personal protection." Arya stood straighter, her arms still around her daughters. "I won't be separated from my children." "Nor should you be," Alaric agreed. "But this is no place for any of you now. Shadowcrest Castle can offer safety, if nothing else." As they prepared to depart, Arya gathered a few small possessions, a worn book, a pouch of dried herbs, a carved wooden toy for each of her daughters. Alaric watched her movements, struck by the grace and dignity she maintained despite her circumstances. Most Omegas he had encountered cowered in his presence. This one met his gaze directly, challenging him even as she accepted his protection. Outside, Alaric's guards had secured horses for their unexpected guests. Arya helped her daughters onto a gentle mare before mounting behind them. The twin girls, Aurora and Nova he had learned, watched him with solemn eyes that seemed too old for their young faces. "King Alaric," Arya said as they prepared to ride, "thank you for saving us. But I must warn you, Lord Magnus believes my blood can end your curse. He won't be the last to try." Alaric met her steady gaze. "Let them try. They'll meet the same fate as those in the lodge." As they rode away from the hunting lodge, Alaric found himself unusually aware of the woman riding beside him. There was something about her, something beyond her obvious courage or the mysterious affinity she had with growing things, something that called to the most primal part of him, the wolf beneath the crown. Unknown to both of them, ancient wheels were turning. A prophecy was beginning to unfold. Light shall be born of shadow, healing what has been broken. The cursed king and the life-giving Omega, opposites drawn inexorably toward each other by forces neither fully understood. In the distance, the moon rose higher, casting its silver light over the forest. And in that light, for the first time in years, King Alaric felt something stir within him that he had long thought dead. Hope. As they rode deeper into the night, Arya silently studied the imposing figure of the king. Stories of the cursed monarch had reached even the Omega Quarter, tales of his ferocity in battle, his cold rulership, the blight that followed in his wake. Nothing in those stories had prepared her for the reality of the man himself. His physical presence was overwhelming, yes, the massive frame, the predatory grace, the golden eyes that seemed to see through all deception. But there was something else, something the stories never mentioned. A profound loneliness that surrounded him like an invisible cloak, a burden of responsibility that weighed on his broad shoulders. Arya had always possessed an intuitive understanding of others, a gift that had often brought her more trouble than benefit. Now, riding beside this feared king who had saved her life, she sensed the complex layers of the man beneath the crown. Aurora and Nova had fallen asleep against her, exhausted by their ordeal. Arya held them close, grateful beyond words for their safety. For years, she had lived with the knowledge that her abilities marked her as different. The small garden she had cultivated in the Omega Quarter had been her sanctuary, a place where her touch brought life instead of scorn. Now that same gift had nearly cost her everything. Yet as she watched the moonlight play across King Alaric's stern profile, a strange certainty settled in her heart. Their meeting was no accident. The old druid blood that flowed in her veins, a heritage her mother had revealed only on her deathbed, resonated with a truth she could not yet articulate. Something about this cursed king called to her, as though their destinies were threads in the same ancient tapestry. Beneath them, the road wound through the darkened forest. Behind them lay persecution and betrayal. Ahead, a fortress of shadow and a kingdom of blight. And between them, the first fragile seedling of a connection that neither yet recognized, a connection that might, against all odds, become the salvation of a dying land. The journey to Shadowcrest Castle took 3 days. 3 days of tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic hoofbeats of their mounts and the occasional whispered conversation between Arya and her daughters. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled, growing more desolate with each passing mile. Vibrant forests gave way to sparse woodlands, then to sickly groves, where trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their bark peeling away in gray strips. Finally, even these pitiful remnants of life surrendered to barren plains where nothing grew but the hardiest of weeds. Arya watched the transformation with quiet horror. She had heard tales of the Shadowcrest blight, but witnessing it firsthand was entirely different. This was not natural decay, but something profound and unnatural, as though the very essence of life had been leached from the soil. Her druid senses, normally attuned to the subtle pulses of growing things, found only emptiness here. It was like traveling through a land of ghosts. Aurora and Nova huddled closer to her as they rode, their young eyes wide with apprehension. They had never ventured beyond the Crescent Moon territory before, and this journey into the blighted heartland of the kingdom was terrifying for them. Arya whispered reassurances, stories of brave princesses and magical forests, anything to distract them from the desolation surrounding them. King Alaric rode at the head of the procession, his broad back straight, his attention seemingly fixed on the path ahead. Yet Arya often caught him glancing back at her and the children, his golden eyes unreadable in his stern face. The king's royal guard maintained a respectful distance from their monarch, reinforcing the isolation that seemed to define his existence. On the evening of the second day, they made camp in the ruins of what had once been a prosperous village. Only stone foundations remained, the wooden structures long since rotted away. As twilight deepened, Arya sat with her daughters near one of the campfires, watching as the king's men efficiently established a perimeter. Gideon, the grizzled captain of the guard, approached with 3 bowls of stew. "For you and the little ones," he said gruffly, avoiding direct eye contact. "King's orders." Arya accepted the food with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, and please convey my thanks to His Majesty as well." Gideon hesitated, his weathered face betraying a moment of uncertainty. He's not what the stories say, you know. The curse doesn't define him." Before Arya could respond, the old warrior had already turned away, striding back to his post with military precision. She watched him go, struck by the fierce loyalty he obviously felt toward his king. Later that night, after Aurora and Nova had fallen asleep wrapped in blankets beside her, Arya found herself unable to rest. The unfamiliar surroundings, the lingering fear from their narrow escape, the uncertainty of what awaited them at Shadowcrest, all conspired to keep sleep at bay. Rising quietly, she stepped away from the fire to gaze at the night sky, finding comfort in the eternal constancy of the stars. "You should be resting." She turned, startled by the king's voice. Alaric stood a few paces away, his massive frame silhouetted against the moonlight. She hadn't heard him approach, remarkable for a man of his size. "As should you, Your Majesty," she replied, summoning the courage to meet his gaze directly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sleep and I are old adversaries. Is it the burden of rule that keeps you awake, or the weight of the crown itself?" The question was bold, perhaps too intimate for their brief acquaintance, but something about the night's stillness and their shared isolation emboldened her. Alaric studied her for a long moment, as though assessing whether she was worthy of an honest answer. "Both," he finally said, "and neither. It is the knowledge that my very existence brings suffering to my people." The raw admission hung in the air between them. Arya felt an unexpected surge of compassion for this feared king, a man both blessed and cursed with immense power. "The plants in my window," she said quietly. "Did they tell you about them? In the Omega Quarter?" Gideon mentioned them. He said they thrived despite the poor conditions. "They thrived because of me." Arya raised her hand, palm up in the moonlight. "My touch nurtures life. Plants, animals, people, they heal faster, grow stronger in my presence. It's a gift from my mother's bloodline, the old druid heritage." "And Magnus knew of this ability?" "Not at first. I kept it hidden, knowing how superstitious he was. But after the twins were born and he cast me out, I had little left to lose. My small garden became known among the other outcasts. They would bring me their sick children, wounded pets, failing crops. I helped where I could. Alaric's expression darkened. And so you became valuable, a commodity to be traded or sacrificed. Just as you became feared, a curse to be avoided. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Two souls marked by powers beyond their control, one that gave life, one that took it away. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither could name. Then Alaric stepped back, his regal mask firmly back in place. "Dawn comes early. You should try to sleep while you can." He turned and walked away, his silhouette merging with the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter. Arya watched him go, feeling as though something significant had just transpired, though she couldn't have articulated exactly what. The following day brought their first glimpse of Shadowcrest Castle in the distance, a massive fortress of black stone rising from the barren plain like a mountain crafted by human hands. Its towers pierced the gray sky like accusatory fingers, and even from afar, the sheer scale of the structure was intimidating. "Is that where we're going, Mama?" Nova whispered, her small fingers tightening around Arya's. "Yes, little star," Arya answered, trying to inject confidence into her voice. "That's where the king lives." "It looks scary," Aurora said, her eyes wide. "Sometimes things that look scary on the outside aren't scary at all once you get to know them," Arya said, though she wasn't sure she believed her own reassurance. As they drew closer to the castle, the signs of the curse's impact became even more pronounced. The earth itself seemed lifeless, cracked and gray as old bone. No birds sang in this wasteland, no insects buzzed, no small creatures scurried through the undergrowth, because there was no undergrowth, only dust and stone. The castle's main gates stood open at their approach, a testament to the king's absolute authority. Who would dare attack the cursed monarch in his own stronghold? Inside, the vast courtyard was a study in austere efficiency. No decorative gardens or fountains softened the harsh lines of the architecture, only the necessary structures for a working fortress: stables, armory, barracks, smithy. Servants and courtiers emerged to greet their returning king, their movements precise and formal. When they saw Arya and her daughters, whispers rippled through their ranks like wind through dead leaves. And Omega and children, brought to the castle by the king himself? Unprecedented. "Captain Gideon will show you to your quarters," Alaric said, his voice pitched for Arya's ears alone as they dismounted. "You and your daughters will be safe here." "Safe, but not free?" Arya couldn't help asking. The king's golden eyes narrowed slightly. "Consider yourselves under royal protection, not royal imprisonment. But I would advise against wandering. The castle holds many dangers for the uninitiated." Before she could question him further, he strode away, immediately surrounded by advisors and courtiers clamoring for his attention after his absence. Gideon approached, gesturing for Arya and the twins to follow him. "This way," he said gruffly. "The East Tower has been prepared for you." The tower chambers were spacious and surprisingly comfortable, with large windows overlooking the distant mountains. Fresh linens adorned the beds, and a fire crackled in the hearth, dispelling the chill of the stone walls. A small adjoining room had been furnished with child-sized furniture for Aurora and Nova, who immediately began exploring their new surroundings with cautious curiosity. "The king has assigned servants to attend to your needs," Gideon explained. "Meals will be brought 3 times daily. If there is anything else you require, inform the guards at your door." "Guards?" Arya's head snapped up. "So we are prisoners." Gideon sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "The guards are as much for your protection as for security, my lady. Word of your abilities will spread quickly. There are those who might seek to exploit them, as Magnus did." After the captain left, Arya moved to the window, gazing out at the bleak landscape surrounding the castle. What twisted fate had brought her here, from one form of confinement to another? Yet as she watched her daughters cautiously exploring their new chambers, their faces brightening as they discovered small treasures, soft blankets, a carved wooden chest filled with toys, a shelf of illustrated books. She felt a grudging gratitude. Whatever his reasons, King Alaric had saved them from certain death and provided them with comfort far beyond what they had known in the Omega Quarter. The days that followed established a new routine. Servants would bring meals, changing linens, and fresh water, always maintaining a careful distance, their eyes averted. The guards rotated shifts outside their door, polite but firm in their instructions that the tower was their designated area. Aurora and Nova, resilient as children often are, adapted quickly to their new surroundings, delighting in the simple luxuries of warm baths and regular meals. Arya, however, grew increasingly restless. The comfortable rooms, for all their amenities, were still a cage. Her druid blood yearned for open skies, for connection with growing things. The barren view from her window offered little solace. On the 5th day of their confinement, a hesitant knock preceded the entrance of a young servant girl, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes downcast. "My lady," she murmured, bobbing a quick curtsy, "His Majesty requests your presence in the royal council chamber." "Does he indeed?" Arya replied, unable to keep a note of irony from her voice. "And am I permitted to decline this royal summons?" The girl looked horrified at the very suggestion. I wouldn't know, my lady. I was only told to escort you." Arya sighed, glancing at her daughters who were engaged in building an elaborate structure from the wooden blocks provided for their entertainment. "Will my children be safe here alone?" "The guards will remain at your door, my lady, and I can send one of the nursemaids to watch over them if you wish." After ensuring the twins would be properly supervised, Arya followed the servant through the labyrinthine corridors of Shadowcrest Castle. The interior was as austere as the exterior, all dark stone and heavy wooden beams. Tapestries hung on some walls, their colors faded to muted grays and browns, depicting scenes of battles and hunts from the kingdom's more prosperous past. The people they passed, servants, guards, courtiers, all reacted similarly to Arya's presence. Initial curiosity followed by averted eyes and a widening of the path before her, as though proximity to the king's strange guest might be dangerous. The royal council chamber proved to be a vast room dominated by a massive table of polished obsidian. Around it sat a dozen men of varying ages, all with the bearing of authority, the king's closest advisors and lords, Arya presumed. At the head of the table, Alaric sat upon a throne-like chair, his powerful frame making even this substantial seat seem somehow inadequate. All conversation ceased as Arya entered, every head turning to stare at the Omega who had been summoned to this inner sanctum. Alaric rose, a gesture that prompted everyone else to stand as well. "Lady Arya," he said, his deep voice filling the chamber, "thank you for joining us." The formal address, "Lady Arya," was not lost on her, nor on the assembled council members, whose expressions ranged from curiosity to outright disapproval. "Your Majesty," she replied, with a slight inclination of her head, neither a full bow nor a defiant refusal of respect. "I was given to understand this was a command, not an invitation." A flicker of something, amusement, approval, crossed Alaric's face before the regal mask returned. "Perhaps a bit of both. Please be seated." A servant hurried to pull out a chair at the far end of the table, opposite from the king. As Arya took her seat, the council members resumed theirs, though many continued to stare openly. "Lady Arya," Alaric began, "I have informed my council of the circumstances that brought you to Shadowcrest. What remains unclear are Lord Magnus's precise intentions regarding your unique abilities." Arya glanced around at the stern faces surrounding her, wondering how much the king had actually revealed. Did they know of her druid heritage? Of the blood ritual that had nearly claimed her life? "Lord Magnus believed my blood could end your curse," she said simply. "He and his followers intended to sacrifice me to the old gods, offering life to balance death." Murmurs rippled around the table. An elderly counselor with silver threading through his dark beard leaned forward. "And do you share this belief, Lady Arya? Do you possess powers that could affect His Majesty's condition?" She met the old man's gaze steadily. "I possess the ability to nurture life, my lord. Plants flourish under my care. Wounds heal faster at my touch. But whether this gift could counteract the king's curse, I cannot say. The old texts speak of balance, of opposing forces finding harmony, but such knowledge has been lost to time. Or deliberately obscured, interjected a younger lord with sharp features and calculating eyes. The Druid bloodlines were thought extinguished centuries ago, their temples razed, their sacred groves burned. Yet here you stand, claiming their heritage. I claim nothing, Arya replied coolly. I simply am what I am, as the king is what he is. Alaric's voice cut through the rising tension. Lady Arya is not here to be interrogated. She and her children are under my protection, and they will be treated accordingly. The sharp-eyed lord subsided, though his expression remained skeptical. The elderly counselor, Lord Thorne, Arya would later learn, spread his hands in a placating gesture. Of course, Your Majesty. We merely seek to understand the situation fully. If there is even a chance that the curse could be lifted, we have pursued every chance for generations, Alaric interrupted. Ancient prophecies, foreign magics, obscure rituals, all have failed. I will not have Lady Arya or her children subjected to experiments or superstitious nonsense. The finality in his tone effectively ended that line of discussion. The council moved on to other matters, reports from the provinces, concerns about dwindling supplies, tensions along the borders with neighboring kingdoms. Throughout it all, Arya sat silently, observing the interplay of politics and personalities around the table. She noticed how some counselors deferred to Alaric out of genuine respect, while others did so from clear fear. She saw the factions forming around certain issues, the alliances and rivalries that shaped the council's dynamics. And she saw how Alaric managed it all with grim efficiency, his decisions swift and final, brooking no argument once his mind was set. After nearly 2 hours, the king dismissed the council. As the lords filed out, casting curious glances at Arya as they passed, Alaric gestured for her to remain seated. When they were alone, save for the guards at the doors, he rose and moved to the large window that dominated one wall of the chamber, gazing out at his blighted kingdom. "What did you make of our illustrious council, Lady Arya?" The question surprised her. "It's not my place to judge your advisors, Your Majesty." "Yet you formed impressions, as any intelligent observer would." He turned to face her, his golden eyes intent. "I would hear them." Arya hesitated, then decided that honesty was her safest course. "Lord Thorne respects you but fears the curse more than you. The sharp-faced Lord Kane, she continued, respects only power, including his own. He sees me as a threat to his influence, the heavy-set man with the jeweled rings. Lord Everett. He is corrupt. His concern for the southern provinces was feigned. He has interests there that he prioritizes over the crown's." Arya stopped, suddenly aware that she might have overstepped. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I speak too freely." To her surprise, a genuine smile briefly transformed Alaric's stern features. "No, Lady Arya, you speak accurately. Few at court would dare such honesty. Few have as little to lose as I do." The smile vanished. "Is that how you see yourself? As having nothing to lose?" "I have my daughters," Arya amended. "They are everything to me, but position, wealth, status, these were taken from me long ago." Alaric moved closer, his towering frame casting her in shadow. "And yet you maintained your dignity, your strength. Many would have been broken by what you endured." "Many were," she said quietly, thinking of the other outcasts in the Omega Quarter, their spirits crushed by rejection and hardship. "I had my children to consider, and my gift, small though it may seem in a world that values destruction over creation." Something flickered in Alaric's eyes at that, a recognition, perhaps, or a shared pain. "Walk with me," he said abruptly. It wasn't a request she could refuse, so Arya rose and followed the king from the council chamber. Guards fell into step behind them as they traversed the castle's corridors, eventually emerging onto a covered walkway that ran along the eastern wall. From this vantage point, the full extent of the kingdom's blight was visible, miles of barren plains stretching to the horizon, broken only by the occasional ruins of abandoned settlements. This was once the most fertile region in the realm, Alaric said, his voice low and intense. Wheat fields stretched as far as the eye could see. Orchards produced fruit so sweet that neighboring kingdoms paid its weight in gold. The rivers teemed with fish, the forests with game. "What happened?" Arya asked, though she suspected she already knew. "My great-grandfather happened. Aaron the Conqueror, they called him. He expanded our borders through war and intimidation, doubling the kingdom's size in a single generation. But it wasn't enough. He wanted more hunting grounds, more timber, more space for his ever-growing ego." Bitterness laced Alaric's words. "He ordered the burning of the ancient Blackwood forest, sacred to the old gods. The fire spread beyond control, consuming not just trees, but the temple at the forest's heart. And the deity's wrath fell upon your bloodline," Arya finished softly. Alaric nodded, his profile harsh against the gray sky. "Each generation, the curse grows stronger. My father could still touch living things without immediately killing them, though they withered quickly in his presence. He extended his hand toward a small weed that had somehow found purchase in a crack in the stone walkway. Before his fingers even made contact, the plant blackened and shriveled to dust. "I bring death with my mere proximity." The naked pain in his voice stirred something deep within Arya. Without thinking, she reached out, placing her hand on the same spot where the weed had died. Focusing her energy as her mother had taught her, she pushed life into the barren crack. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a tiny green shoot emerged from the dust, unfurling a single defiant leaf. Alaric stared at the small miracle, his expression a complex mixture of wonder and sorrow. "How long will it last?" "A few days, perhaps," Arya admitted. "My power is not permanent. Life must ultimately sustain itself. As must a kingdom." Alaric straightened, his momentary vulnerability concealed once more behind the mask of kingship. "Your abilities are remarkable, Lady Arya, but they are also dangerous, to you most of all. There are those who would use you as Magnus attempted to do, or worse. That is why you must remain within the castle walls, under guard." "Protected or controlled?" Arya challenged, emboldened by their shared moment of connection. "Both," he acknowledged with unexpected candor, "until I can be certain of your safety." Before she could respond, a commotion below drew their attention. In the main courtyard, a group of riders had arrived, their horses lathered with sweat from hard riding. At their center was a man whose resemblance to Magnus was unmistakable, similar red hair and build, though younger and leaner. "Magnus's son," Alaric growled, his body tensing like a predator preparing to strike. "Varric." "Your Majesty!" one of the castle guards called up from the courtyard. "Lord Varric of Crescent Moon requests an immediate audience. He claims it concerns the woman you took from their territory." Alaric turned to Arya, his expression grave. "Return to your chambers. Do not leave them until I send for you." "What does he want?" she asked, fear for her daughters surging through her. "To finish what his father started, I imagine." The king's voice had dropped to a dangerous growl, his eyes shifting from golden human to the molten amber of his wolf. "But he will find that I am not so easily defied in my own domain." Guards escorted Arya back to the East Tower, where she found Aurora and Nova playing contentedly under the watchful eye of the nursemaid. She dismissed the woman with thanks, then gathered her daughters close, trying to quell the dread that had taken root in her chest. What if Varric demanded their return? What if Alaric, for all his talk of protection, decided that the political cost of sheltering them was too high? The king had shown unexpected kindness, but he was still a ruler with a kingdom to consider. 3 Omega refugees might be an acceptable sacrifice for peace. Hours passed with no word. Arya paced the chamber, alternating between watching her daughters and gazing out the window at the courtyard below, where Varric's men remained with their horses, their presence a visible reminder of the threat they posed. As twilight deepened into night, a knock at the door heralded not a messenger, but King Alaric himself. He entered without waiting for permission, his powerful frame seeming to fill the room. The scent of wolf, of alpha rolled off him in waves, and Arya instinctively positioned herself between him and her sleeping children. "Lord Varric has been denied," Alaric announced without preamble. "He claimed you were his father's property, unlawfully taken by the crown. I reminded him that no subject of my kingdom is property, and that his father stands accused of treason and attempted ritual murder." Relief flooded through Arya. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Do not thank me yet." Alaric's expression was grim. Varric did not come alone for a simple negotiation. He brought 20 of his best warriors, an escort far larger than necessary for a diplomatic mission. "He intends to take us by force," Arya realized, her blood running cold. "He will fail," Alaric stated with absolute certainty. "But his presence here is troubling for other reasons. The Crescent Moon Pack has traditionally been among my most loyal tributaries. For them to openly challenge me suggests either extraordinary confidence or powerful allies." "Magnus always had ambitions beyond his station," Arya said. "He spoke often of restoring the natural order of the world, alphas in unquestioned dominance, omegas in subservience, the old ways reinstated." "The old ways," Alaric repeated with contempt. "Superstition and brutality dressed up as tradition. My father worked to reform those practices, and I have continued his efforts. Perhaps that is the true reason for Magnus's defiance." A thought occurred to Arya, one that sent a chill down her spine. "Or perhaps it's more personal. Magnus knows that my bloodline carries the potential to end your curse. What if he fears what would happen if that curse were lifted? A fully empowered Alpha King with no weakness to exploit." Alaric's golden eyes narrowed as he considered this possibility. "You believe your abilities could truly affect the curse?" "I don't know," she admitted. "The old stories speak of balance, of opposing forces finding harmony. My gift nurtures life. Your curse brings decay. In theory, there could be a resonance between them." The king moved to the window, gazing out at the night-shrouded kingdom. "Theories and legends. I have pursued countless such leads over the years, Lady Arya. All ended in disappointment. Yet you keep me here under guard. Some part of you must believe it's possible." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable in the chamber's dim lighting. "I keep you here because you and your children deserve protection after what Magnus tried to do. Whether your gift can affect my curse is secondary." But Arya sensed the hesitation in his voice, the careful choice of words. For all his cynicism, a part of King Alaric still hoped, still searched for an end to the curse that had defined his existence. Before she could press further, a distant commotion echoed through the castle. Shouts, the clang of metal on metal, the unmistakable sounds of conflict. Alaric was at the door in an instant. "Bar this behind me," he commanded. "Do not open it for anyone but myself or Captain Gideon." "What's happening?" Arya demanded, fear gripping her heart. "It seems Lord Varric has decided on a more direct approach," Alaric growled, his voice deepening as his wolf stirred beneath the surface. "Stay with your children. I will handle this." He was gone before she could respond, the heavy door slamming behind him. Arya rushed to secure the bolt, then hurried to where Aurora and Nova slept, somehow still undisturbed by the growing chaos. Gently she woke them, pressing fingers to their lips when they would have spoken. "Listen carefully, my stars," she whispered. "Bad men are in the castle. We need to hide." Wide-eyed but obedient, the twins followed her to the large wardrobe in the corner of the chamber. Arya ushered them inside, arranging cloaks and gowns to conceal them. "No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, stay hidden until I or the king or Captain Gideon come for you. Do you understand?" They nodded solemnly, their small faces pale with fear, but resolute. Arya's heart swelled with fierce pride, even as it constricted with dread. She pressed kisses to their foreheads, then closed the wardrobe doors, leaving them in darkness, but for a small crack between the panels. The sounds of battle were growing louder, closer. Arya looked around the chamber for anything that might serve as a weapon, finally settling on a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. As she gripped it tightly, preparing for whatever might come through that door, She reached deep within herself, calling upon the druid blood that was her inheritance. Her mother had taught her that their gift had two aspects, the nurturing of life and the balancing of energies. She had mastered the first, but barely explored the second. Now, with her children's lives at stake, Arya opened herself fully to the ancient power flowing through her veins. A strange calm settled over her, a certainty that transcended fear. The living energy around her, faint though it was in this blighted place, became visible to her heightened senses, glowing threads connecting all things. And in the distance, a blazing bonfire of power that could only be King Alaric, his wolf ascendant, tearing through Varroc's warriors with unstoppable fury. The door to her chamber shuddered under a heavy impact. Once, twice, then the wood splintered around the bolt. Varroc himself burst through, blood spattering his armor, his green eyes wild with rage, and something else, fear. "You!" he snarled, advancing on Arya. "This is your fault. Your cursed blood. Your witchcraft." Arya raised the poker defensively. "Stay back, Varroc. Your quarrel is with the king, not with me." "My quarrel is with anything that threatens the natural order," he spat. "My father saw the truth of you, an abomination that could upset the balance of power. The king may be blinded by your Omega wiles, but I am not." He lunged forward with unexpected speed, knocking the poker from her grasp and seizing her by the throat. "Where are the brats?" he demanded, lifting her until her feet barely touched the floor. "Where are your demon spawn?" Arya clawed at his hand, fighting for breath. Through darkening vision, she saw a shadow loom in the shattered doorway, massive, primal, radiating lethal intent. Alaric, in his full alpha wolf form, was a sight few witnessed and lived to describe. Larger than any natural wolf, his midnight fur absorbing light rather than reflecting it, he moved with impossible grace for a creature of such size. Blood matted the fur around his muzzle, evidence of the fate that had befallen Varroc's men. Varroc sensed the predator behind him too late. He whirled, releasing Arya, who crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. "My lord," he stammered, backing away. "This isn't what—" The alpha wolf's growl cut off his words, a sound so primal and menacing that it seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the castle. Varroc drew his sword in desperation, but before he could even raise it fully, Alaric was upon him. The killing was swift and terrible. Jaws designed by nature to crush bone closed around Varroc's throat, silencing his scream before it could fully form. A sharp twist, a spray of crimson, and Magnus's heir collapsed to the floor, his life bleeding out across the stone. Arya watched in stunned silence as the massive wolf stood over its kill, amber eyes blazing with an emotion too complex to name. Then, gradually, the wolf form receded, bones and sinew rearranging themselves until King Alaric stood before her in human form once more, his clothing torn and bloody from the transformation and battle. "Your daughters?" he asked, his voice rough with the remnants of his wolf. "Hidden," Arya managed, her own voice barely a whisper from Varroc's choking grip. "In the wardrobe." Alaric moved to the heavy wooden cabinet, opening the doors with surprising gentleness. "It's safe now," he said to the darkness within. "You can come out." Aurora and Nova emerged cautiously, their eyes growing round at the sight of the dead man on the floor and the blood-spattered king. Before Arya could reach them, they had rushed to her side, pressing against her protectively, despite their own fear. "You're hurt," Aurora said, touching the bruises already forming on her mother's throat. "I'm fine, my brave star," Arya assured her, though her voice was raspy and each word painful. "The bad man hurt Mama," Nova said, turning accusing eyes to the king. "Did you hurt him back?" Alaric regarded the small girl with surprising gravity. "Yes," he said simply. "He will never hurt your mother again." Nova considered this, then nodded firmly. "Good." Despite everything, the violence, the danger, the uncertainty still facing them, Arya found herself smiling at her daughter's fierce approval. Children understood justice in its most basic form. Those who harm others should be stopped from doing so again. Gideon appeared in the doorway, his armor dented and bloody, but his bearing still proud. "The castle is secure, Your Majesty. Varroc's men have been eliminated or captured. We suffered minimal casualties." "And the prisoners?" Alaric asked. "Confined to the north dungeon awaiting your judgment." "Double the guard on this tower. I want Lady Arya and her daughters protected at all costs." Alaric turned back to Arya. "This attack changes things. Varroc would not have dared such a bold move without support. Someone powerful wants you badly enough to risk my wrath." "Or they want you weakened," Arya suggested, her mind racing despite her injuries. "Perhaps this was never truly about me, but about drawing you into conflict, forcing you to reveal your strengths and weaknesses." Alaric's expression sharpened with interest. "You think this was a test?" "Varroc was many things, but he was not a fool. He would not have attacked your fortress without a strategy for escape or a powerful backer to protect him from consequences." Arya glanced at her daughters, who were watching the exchange with wide, solemn eyes. "But this is not a discussion for little ears." Understanding immediately, Alaric nodded to Gideon. "Have the royal physician examine Lady Arya's injuries, then move them to the royal wing. The east tower is too exposed." After the captain had escorted them to a new, more secure suite of rooms, and the physician had treated Arya's bruised throat with a soothing balm, the twins finally succumbed to exhaustion. Arya tucked them into the large bed they would share, singing softly, despite the pain in her throat, until they drifted into sleep. She was sitting by the fire, lost in thought, when Alaric returned. He had changed from his blood-stained attire into simple black clothing, though nothing could diminish his inherent regality. "They're sleeping," Arya said softly as he entered. "Thank you for saving us, again." Alaric moved to stand beside her chair, gazing into the flames. "It seems to be becoming a habit. One I hope won't be necessary much longer." "As do I." He turned to look at her directly, his golden eyes reflecting the firelight. "You were right about Varroc. His attack was too well coordinated, too bold for a man of his limited resources. Someone else was behind this, someone who wanted either you or me, or perhaps both." "The question is who?" Arya mused. "And why now? What has changed?" "You have changed things," Alaric said quietly. "Your presence in my castle, the rumors of your abilities, it has stirred old hopes and old fears alike." The weight of his gaze was almost physical, intense and searching. Arya found herself unable to look away, drawn into the depths of those ancient wounded eyes. "The prophecy," she whispered, a memory of her mother's teaching surfacing. "Light born of shadow, healing what has been broken." "You know of it?" "My mother spoke of it. It's part of the old Druid lore, a foretelling from the time before the burning of the Blackwood. She believed—" Arya hesitated, then continued. "She believed our bloodline was part of that prophecy, though she never explained exactly how." For a long moment, Alaric was silent, his expression unreadable. Then he knelt before her chair, bringing his face level with hers, an unprecedented gesture from a king to an Omega. "Lady Arya," he said, his voice low and intense, "I have spent my life pursuing cures and prophecies, following every trail no matter how faint, only to face disappointment after disappointment. I cannot allow myself to hope again without reason." "Yet you hope nonetheless," she replied softly. "As do I." Their eyes held for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Then Alaric rose, resuming his kingly bearing. "Rest," he commanded gently. "Tomorrow we will speak more of prophecies and possibilities. For tonight, know that you and your daughters are safe. I will permit no harm to come to you while you are under my protection." As he turned to leave, Arya called after him, "Your Majesty." He paused at the door, looking back. "The curse doesn't define you," she said, echoing Gideon's words from days earlier. "Whatever happens, remember that." Something like surprise flickered across his features, followed by an emotion Arya couldn't quite name. Without responding, he inclined his head slightly, then departed, leaving her alone with her sleeping children and the crackling fire. Outside the window, the perpetual gray of Shadowcrest's sky had given way to night, stars glimmering in the blackness like distant promises. One particularly bright star caught Arya's attention, a beacon of light in the darkness, much like the tiny green shoot she had coaxed from the barren stone earlier that day. Small beginnings, her mother had always said, lead to great changes. Perhaps that was true of curses as well as gardens. With that thought to comfort her, Arya finally allowed herself to rest, unaware that far below in the castle's ancient foundations, the king stood before an altar of black stone, confronting his own desperate hopes and deepest fears. Dawn arrived in Shadowcrest with a hesitant light that struggled to penetrate the perpetual gloom hanging over the castle. Arya stood at the window of their new chambers in the royal wing, watching as servants and soldiers moved through the courtyard below, their routines seemingly unchanged despite the violence of the previous night. Only the increased number of guards patrolling the walls betrayed any indication that the fortress had been breached. Her throat still ached from Varric's brutal grip, though the royal physician's balm had reduced the swelling considerably. Behind her, Aurora and Nova slept peacefully in the massive canopied bed, their small forms dwarfed by the ornate furniture. They had always been resilient children, adapting to hardship with a grace that continuously amazed their mother. Even so, Arya worried about the effects these traumatic events might have on them. A soft knock drew her attention to the door. When she opened it, she found not a servant but Captain Gideon, his weathered face grave. "Lady Arya," he said quietly, mindful of the sleeping children, "His Majesty requests your presence in the royal library. When the little ones wake, servants will bring breakfast and attend to their needs." Arya hesitated, glancing back at her daughters. "They will be safe," Gideon assured her. "I've assigned my most trusted men to guard this chamber. No one enters without my express permission or the king's." After the events of the previous night, Arya found she trusted the gruff captain's word. She nodded, pausing only to don a shawl over her simple dress before following him into the corridor. The royal wing of Shadowcrest Castle was markedly different from the austere East Tower where they had initially been housed. Here, the hallways were wider, the ceilings higher, the stone walls adorned with tapestries that, while faded by time, still retained hints of their original splendor. They passed several heavily guarded doors that Arya presumed led to the king's personal chambers. The library, when they reached it, proved to be a vast circular room occupying the entirety of one of the castle's towers. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, laden with books, scrolls, and artifacts. A spiral staircase wound up to a second-level gallery that continued the impressive collection. At the center of the room stood a massive table of dark wood, its surface covered with open books and unfurled scrolls. King Alaric stood with his back to the door, examining a particularly ancient-looking text. He had foregone his usual regal attire for simpler garb, a black shirt and trousers that emphasized his powerful physique rather than his status. Without the trappings of monarchy, he seemed somehow both more approachable and more intimidating, his inherent strength no longer softened by ceremony. "Leave us," he commanded without turning, and Gideon withdrew, closing the heavy door behind him. Only then did Alaric look up, his golden eyes immediately finding Arya's. "How are your injuries?" "Healing," she replied simply, one hand instinctively touching her bruised throat. "My daughters?" "Still sleeping when I left them." Alaric nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Good. They showed remarkable courage last night. You've raised them well, despite difficult circumstances." The unexpected compliment caught Arya off guard. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Alaric," he said abruptly, "when we are alone, I would have you call me by my name. Titles create distance, and what we must discuss requires proximity." Another surprise. Arya studied his face, seeking the meaning behind this unprecedented informality. The king, Alaric, met her gaze steadily, revealing nothing. "Very well, Alaric," she said, testing the name on her tongue. It felt strangely intimate, like crossing a boundary that had been carefully maintained until now. "What is it you wish to discuss that requires such proximity?" He gestured to the table and the array of ancient texts spread across it. Prophecies, curses, the intersection of bloodlines and destinies, and more specifically this. He lifted a brittle parchment with extreme care, holding it out for her inspection. The text was written in the old language, the flowing script familiar to Arya from her mother's teachings. "I cannot read it," Alaric admitted. "The language was lost to my lineage generations ago. But it speaks, I'm told, of the curse and a possible means of breaking it." Arya accepted the parchment, careful not to damage the fragile document. The words were faded, but still legible to her trained eye. As she read, a chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the castle's perpetual coolness. "When shadow consumes light and life becomes death, the balance of worlds shall hang by a thread," she translated slowly. "From the blood of those wronged shall come healing hands to restore what was broken and rejoin sundered lands. But beware the price of such powerful arts. One life may be gained, but another departs." She looked up to find Alaric watching her intently. "It's a prophecy," she continued, "but also a warning. The restoration of balance requires sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Alaric's voice was taut, controlled. "It doesn't specify, but prophecies, especially those of the old Druids, are rarely literal. The life that departs might not be a physical death, but a transformation, an ending of one state of being and the beginning of another." Alaric turned away, moving to the tower's single window. Beyond it, the blighted landscape stretched to the horizon, a visible reminder of the curse's consequences. "For centuries my family has searched for a cure," he said, his deep voice barely audible. "My father dedicated his life to it, as did his father before him. Ancient texts, foreign mages, obscure rituals, all have failed, and with each generation the curse grows stronger, the blight spreads further." Arya set down the parchment and moved to stand beside him at the window. "Yet you continue to search." "What choice do I have? I am king. My duty is to my people, to this land. If my death would end the curse, I would gladly offer it. But the prophecies suggest that my passing would only transfer the burden to the next in my bloodline, if there were to be one." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Another cruel aspect of the curse. It does not prevent me from siring heirs. But what kind of father dooms his children to such an inheritance?" The raw pain in his voice stirred something deep within Arya. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his arm, the first time she had initiated contact between them. "Your bloodline was cursed for destroying the sacred," she said quietly. "Perhaps it can only be restored by protecting it." Alaric looked down at her hand, then at her face, an unreadable emotion flickering in his golden eyes. "And what would you consider sacred, Arya of the Druids?" "Life," she answered simply. "Balance. The recognition that all things are connected, that destruction and creation are part of the same cycle. Your ancestors disrupted that cycle with violence. Perhaps it can only be restored with healing." For a long moment, Alaric was silent, his gaze never leaving hers. Then, with deliberate slowness, he placed his hand over hers, where it rested on his arm. The effect was immediate and startling. A surge of energy passed between them, not painful, but intense, like stepping from shadow into brilliant sunlight. Arya gasped, and Alaric's eyes widened with equal surprise. "What was that?" he demanded, though he did not withdraw his hand. "I don't know," Arya admitted, equally shaken. "A resonance between opposing energies, perhaps. My gift responding to your curse." Alaric's grip tightened, not painfully but with a desperate intensity. "Could it be so simple? Direct contact between our powers?" Before Arya could respond, a commotion erupted outside the library door. Raised voices, the sound of running feet, then an urgent pounding. "Your Majesty!" Gideon's voice, strained with unusual urgency. "We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Alaric released Arya's hand reluctantly, his expression shifting back to regal authority. "Enter," he commanded. The captain burst through the door, his normally composed demeanor visibly shaken. "Forgive the interruption, Your Majesty, but our scouts have returned from the western border. They report a large force moving toward Shadowcrest, at least 500 warriors bearing the standards of multiple tributary lords, including Crescent Moon." Alaric's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Varric was merely the advance scout," he growled. "The real attack is yet to come." "And Lord Magnus?" Arya asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "Is he among them?" Gideon nodded grimly. "At the head of the column, my lady, alongside Lord Cain." "Cain?" Alaric's growl deepened, his eyes flashing amber as his wolf stirred beneath the surface. "My own counselor betrays me?" "It seems he has been in league with Magnus for some time," Gideon replied. "The prisoners from last night's attack have been persuaded to share what they know. Cain has been feeding information to Magnus for months, including details of your travels to Crescent Moon territory." "They knew we were coming," Arya realized. "They prepared the ritual in advance, expecting you to take me as a tribute or hostage. And when I instead offered you protection, they moved to their contingency plan." Alaric's expression was thunderous. "Bring me Cain, now!" As Gideon hurried to obey, Alaric turned back to Arya. "Return to your chambers. Stay with your daughters. Do not leave for any reason until I come for you personally." "What will you do?" she asked, suddenly afraid for him despite his obvious power. "What kings have always done," he replied grimly. "Defend what is mine." The word choice, mine, sent an unexpected shiver through Arya. Was she included in that possessive claim? The thought should have offended her independent nature, yet somehow it didn't. Instead, it kindled a warmth deep within her, a sense of belonging she had not experienced since before Magnus's rejection. Before she could examine this confusing reaction, Alaric continued, "The approaching force is still a day's march away. We have time to prepare, but I must know why Cain has betrayed me, and what Magnus truly seeks." "It's not just me they want," Arya said slowly, realization dawning. "It's what I represent, the possibility of ending your curse. Magnus doesn't want the curse broken. He wants it to destroy you so he can claim your throne." Alaric's expression confirmed her theory. "Go now," he said softly. "We will continue this discussion when the immediate threat has been addressed." With a quick nod, Arya departed, her mind racing with implications. As she hurried back to the royal wing, servants and guards moved purposefully through the corridors, the castle shifting to a war footing with practiced efficiency. In their chambers, she found Aurora and Nova awake and being entertained by a kindly older maid who was showing them how to fold linen napkins into the shapes of birds. They looked up with delighted smiles when Arya entered, seemingly recovered from the previous night's terrors. "Mama!" Aurora exclaimed. "Look what we made!" Arya forced a smile, not wanting to frighten them with the latest developments. "Those are beautiful, my stars. Have you eaten?" The maid bobbed a curtsy. "Yes, my lady. A proper breakfast was served, and both young ladies have eaten well." "Thank you," Arya said with genuine gratitude. "You've been very kind to them." "It's been my pleasure, my lady. It's been many years since Shadowcrest had the laughter of children within its walls." The old woman's eyes grew momentarily distant, as though recalling happier times. Then she shook herself and smiled. "I'll leave you to your family, but please ring if you need anything at all." When they were alone, Arya gathered her daughters close, breathing in their familiar scent, drawing strength from their small, warm bodies pressed against hers. "Is something wrong, Mama?" Nova asked, always the more perceptive of the twins. Arya hesitated, then decided that a version of the truth was better than false reassurances. "Some bad people are coming to the castle," she explained gently, "but King Alaric and his soldiers will keep us safe. We just need to stay in our rooms for a little while." "Like we did in the old house when the moon was full and Lord Magnus got angry?" Aurora asked, referring to the volatile Alpha's monthly rages that had often endangered those in the Omega Quarter. The comparison broke Arya's heart. "Yes, my brave girl, just like that. But King Alaric is not like Lord Magnus. He won't let anyone hurt us." "He killed the bad man who hurt you," Nova stated, with the matter-of-fact acceptance only a child could manage. "He's strong." "Yes," Arya agreed softly. "He's very strong." The hours passed slowly. Arya tried to keep her daughters occupied with games and stories, but her own anxiety made it difficult to maintain the pretense of normalcy. Occasionally, sounds of military preparation echoed from the courtyard below, orders being shouted, weapons being distributed, horses being readied. Late in the afternoon, as the perpetual gloom of Shadowcrest began to deepen toward true darkness, another knock came at their door. Arya tensed, but it was only a servant bringing their evening meal and fresh water for washing. "Any news?" Arya asked as the young man set down the tray. He shook his head. "Nothing I'm privy to, my lady, but the entire castle guard has been mobilized, and civilians from the surrounding villages are being brought within the walls." After he left, Arya picked at her food without appetite, ensuring her daughters ate properly, while her own stomach remained knotted with worry. Not for herself, she had survived Magnus's cruelty and would survive whatever came next, but for the king. Despite his obvious power and military strength, she couldn't shake the feeling that Alaric was walking into a trap carefully laid by his enemies. As night fell completely, she put the twins to bed, singing softly until they drifted into sleep. Then she returned to her vigil by the window, watching the torches move along the castle walls as guards maintained their rounds. A soft click from the door made her whirl around, heart racing. But it wasn't an intruder. It was Alaric himself, entering silently. In the dim light from the hearth, his face was all harsh plains and shadows, his expression grim. "What's happened?" Arya asked, keeping her voice low to avoid waking her daughters. "Cain has confessed his treachery," Alaric replied, equally quiet. Under persuasion, he revealed that Magnus has been planning this coup for over a year. He believes the prophecy about ending the curse, but his interpretation differs from ours. "How so?" "He believes the curse can be transferred rather than broken. That by performing the blood ritual with you at the moment of my death, he can ensure the curse's power is channeled into him instead of dying with me." "That's insane," Arya gasped. "The curse doesn't work that way. It's bound to your bloodline, not to whoever kills you." "Rationality has never been Magnus's strength," Alaric said dryly. "He is desperate for power and willing to believe whatever justifies his ambitions." He moved to stand beside her at the window, his powerful frame radiating tension. "They will reach the castle by midday tomorrow. I've ordered the defenses prepared, but I'm concerned about a threat from within. Cain claims there are other traitors among my council and guard, though he refused to name them, even under extreme duress." "You think they might open the gates to Magnus's forces?" "It's possible, which is why I've come to a decision." Alaric turned to face her fully, his golden eyes gleaming in the firelight. "You and your daughters cannot remain in the castle during the siege. It's too dangerous." Fear clutched at Arya's heart. "Where would we go? There's nowhere safe if Magnus—" "There is one place," Alaric interrupted. "The ancient temple in the forest beyond the northern ridge. It's well hidden, protected by old magic even the curse cannot fully penetrate. Gideon will escort you there before dawn." "And you?" Arya asked, though she already knew the answer. "I will remain to defend Shadowcrest. This is my kingdom, my responsibility." "It's suicide," she protested. "If there are traitors among your own men—" "Then I will die as I have lived," Alaric growled, "as king of this blighted realm." The finality in his voice sent a chill through Arya. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. Once again, that strange energy surged between them, stronger than before. Alaric's eyes widened, and he stared at their joined hands. "What is this connection between us?" he murmured. "I've never felt anything like it." "Nor have I," Arya admitted. "It's as though our powers recognize each other, like opposing forces seeking balance." A thought struck her, so sudden and compelling that she gasped aloud. "The prophecy, from the blood of those wronged shall come healing hands. It's not about blood sacrifice, it's about bloodlines. My druid ancestors were among those wronged when your great-grandfather destroyed their sacred grove." Understanding dawned in Alaric's eyes. "And your healing gift, passed down through that bloodline, might be the key to breaking the curse." "Not might be," Arya said with growing conviction. "Is. I can feel it, Alaric. When we touch, there's a harmony between us, a resonance that feels right, as though the universe itself is sighing with relief. Hope, fragile but undeniable, flickered across the king's face. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by grim resignation. Even if you're right, it may be too late. Magnus's forces will be here by midday, and I cannot abandon my kingdom to seek personal salvation. Then let me stay, Arya urged. Let me help you fight this curse before Magnus arrives. Alaric shook his head firmly. I will not risk your safety or that of your daughters. The temple is your best chance for survival. If I prevail against Magnus, I will come for you. If not— He faltered, then continued with forced steadiness. If not, Gideon has instructions to see you safely to the southern kingdoms, beyond Magnus's reach. He began to withdraw his hand, but Arya held fast. There's another option, she said, an idea forming that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Let me try to heal you now, completely. How? We don't know how the connection between us works, or what it might require. My mother taught me that true healing comes from intuition, from trusting the energy that flows between living things. I've never attempted anything as significant as breaking a generational curse, but I feel that it's possible. Arya's voice grew stronger with conviction. Let me try, Alaric. What do we have to lose? For a long moment, the king was silent, conflict evident in his expression. Then slowly he nodded. Very well. But not here, not with your daughters present. If something goes wrong, I would not have them witness it. He led her from the chamber, instructing the guards to remain vigilant. They moved through the silent corridors of the royal wing, descending a narrow staircase that Arya had not noticed before. The air grew cooler and damper as they descended, the stone walls more ancient, bearing carvings in a language long forgotten. Finally, they emerged into a circular chamber deep beneath the castle. Arya recognized it immediately as a sacred space, the geometric precision of its construction, the alignment with celestial movements evident in the small apertures in the ceiling that would admit starlight at specific times. The original foundation of Shadowcrest, Alaric explained, his voice hushed in the stillness. Built long before my ancestors claimed these lands, before the curse. The Druids constructed it as a place of communion between worlds. In the center of the chamber stood a simple altar of white stone, unmarked by tools or symbols. Around the perimeter, alcoves had been carved into the walls, each containing a small pool of water fed by underground springs. The only light came from bioluminescent fungi growing along the ceiling, casting everything in a soft blue glow. How did you find this place? Arya asked, awed by the preservation of such an ancient site. My father showed it to me when I was a boy. He believed the answer to the curse might lie in understanding what came before it. He spent many nights here, searching for insights. A shadow crossed Alaric's face. In the end, it offered him no solutions, only more questions. Arya moved slowly around the chamber, her fingers trailing along the cool stone walls. The energy here was different from the rest of the castle, older, purer, untouched by the curse. She could feel it resonating with her own druid blood, welcoming her home after centuries of absence. This is perfect, she breathed. The energies here are aligned with healing and transformation. She turned back to Alaric, who stood watching her with an unreadable expression. Are you certain you want to attempt this? He asked. The prophecy mentions sacrifice. I would not have you risk yourself for my sake. I'm not doing this just for you, Arya replied honestly. I'm doing it for my daughters, for your people, for the balance that was broken generations ago, and yes, for myself as well. I'm tired of living in fear, of being valued only for what others can take from me. Alaric nodded, understanding in his golden eyes. What must I do? Lie on the altar, Arya instructed, and remove your shirt. I'll need direct contact with your skin. If the intimacy of the request bothered him, Alaric showed no sign of it. With efficient movements, he stripped off his black shirt, revealing a torso mapped with scars from countless battles. He was magnificent, all powerful muscle and controlled strength, yet there was vulnerability in him now as he reclined on the ancient stone, placing himself literally and figuratively in her hands. Arya approached slowly, summoning all she had learned of her heritage, all the lessons her mother had passed down in hushed whispers during the dark nights of her childhood. She placed one hand on Alaric's chest, directly over his heart, and the other on his forehead. The connection that had sparked between them before now roared to life like wildfire. Energy surged through Arya, not just from her own gift, but from the sacred chamber itself, as though the very stones were lending their ancient power to her work. Beneath her palms, Alaric's skin grew warm, then hot, though he made no sound of discomfort. Arya closed her eyes, focusing inward, seeking the twisted knot of darkness that was the curse. It was there, a malevolent presence coiled around Alaric's life force like a parasite, feeding on his strength even as it used him as a conduit to blight the land. For generations it had grown, adapting to each new host, becoming more entrenched with each passing decade. "I can feel it," she whispered, her voice strained with effort. "It's deeply rooted in you, but it's not part of you. It's a separate entity, a corruption imposed from without." "Can you remove it?" Alaric's voice was taut with controlled hope. "Not remove," Arya replied, instinctively understanding. "Transform. The energy cannot be destroyed, only redirected. The old gods didn't create the curse to punish endlessly, but to teach balance. Your ancestors took life without understanding its value. The curse forces you to witness the consequences of that disregard." As she spoke, Arya poured her own life energy into Alaric, not combating the curse directly, but flowing alongside it, around it, offering an alternative path. Where the curse brought decay, she offered renewal. Where it isolated, she connected. The strain was immense. Sweat beaded on her brow as she channeled more power than she had ever wielded before. The curse fought back, its ancient malice seeking to corrupt her healing energy, to twist it to its own purposes. For a moment, Arya felt herself faltering, her strength waning against the curse's onslaught. Then Alaric's hands came up to cover hers, his touch an anchor in the storm of conflicting energies. "Take what you need from me," he urged. "My strength is yours." The selflessness of the offer, from a man who had been taught all his life to hold himself apart, to trust no one, broke something open within Arya. Tears slipped from beneath her closed eyelids as she accepted his gift, drawing on his considerable power to bolster her own. Together they pushed against the curse, not with force, but with persistent, gentle pressure. Like water wearing away stone, they found the tiny fractures in its structure and widened them, allowing light to penetrate where only darkness had dwelled for generations. The chamber began to hum with energy, the water in the alcove pools rippling though no wind disturbed them. The bioluminescent fungi brightened, casting the sacred space in an otherworldly glow. Arya felt herself entering a trance state, her consciousness expanding beyond the confines of her physical form. In this heightened awareness, she could see the curse for what it truly was, not just a punishment, but a lesson incompletely learned. "The balance," she murmured, her voice seeming to come from very far away. It was never about destruction or creation alone, but the recognition that both are necessary, that both must be honored. From the depths of the trance, a vision emerged. The ancient grove, the sacred heart of the Blackwood forest, as it had been before the burning. Trees of impossible age and size, their branches forming a cathedral ceiling through which dappled sunlight fell. At the center, a circle of white stones, much like the chamber where they now worked. And standing within that circle, a figure neither male nor female, neither human nor beast, but somehow all of these, the forest deity whose wrath had birthed the curse. "I understand now," Arya whispered. "The curse was never meant to be broken, but fulfilled. Your bloodline was not condemned to suffer eternally, but challenged to evolve, to become not just takers of life, but protectors of it." As this revelation crystallized within her, Arya felt the curse's resistance falter. It had been created with a purpose, and that purpose was being acknowledged at last. The malevolent energy began to shift, to uncoil from around Alaric's life force, not dissipating, but transforming. A gasp escaped Alaric as the change rippled through him. His back arched off the stone altar, his hands gripping Arya's with almost painful intensity. For a terrifying moment, Arya feared she had miscalculated, that the curse was killing him rather than transforming. Then his eyes flew open, glowing not with the amber of his wolf, but with a brilliant gold that illuminated the chamber. "I can see," he breathed in wonder. "I can see it all." The connection between them surged one final time, so powerful that it lifted Arya physically from her feet. For an eternal moment, they existed not as separate beings, but as twin aspects of a single force, the healing and the healed, the light and the shadow, creation and destruction in perfect balance. Then gradually the energy began to subside. Arya found herself kneeling beside the altar, her hands still clasped in Alaric's, both of them trembling with exhaustion. The chamber had returned to its previous state of quiet sacredness, though something fundamental had shifted in the very air around them. "Did it work?" Alaric asked hoarsely, struggling to sit up. Instead of answering, Arya reached for a small pouch at her belt. From it, she withdrew a single seed, one she had been saving from a particularly vibrant star-petal flower that had grown in her window box at the Omega Quarter. She placed it in Alaric's palm, then curled his fingers gently around it. "Open your hand," she instructed softly. Alaric complied, his expression a mixture of dread and desperate hope. They both looked down at his open palm, at the small seed resting there. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, impossibly, the seed stirred. A tiny white root emerged, anchoring itself in the moisture of Alaric's skin. A green shoot followed, unfurling with impossible speed. Before their astonished eyes, a miniature star-petal flower bloomed in the king's palm, its purple petals vibrant against his skin. "It's alive," Alaric whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "It's alive in my hand." Arya smiled through her tears. "Not broken," she said. "Transformed. The curse's destructive aspect has been balanced with creative power. You now carry both within you, in harmony." "How?" Alaric looked from the flower to Arya's face, awe and confusion warring in his expression. "The prophecy spoke of sacrifice," Arya explained gently. "I've given a portion of my healing gift to you, just as you now share with me the strength to withstand decay. We are connected, balanced, two sides of the same coin." The implications of this transformation seemed to dawn on Alaric all at once. He looked up sharply, his golden eyes, now flecked with green that hadn't been there before, widening with realization. "The kingdom," he said urgently. "If the curse is transformed, then—" "The blight should begin to recede," Arya confirmed. "Not immediately. The land has suffered for generations and will take time to heal. But the process has begun." Alaric closed his hand gently around the tiny flower, then tucked it carefully into a pocket near his heart. With renewed vigor, he rose from the altar, pulling Arya to her feet alongside him. "Magnus," he growled, purpose filling his voice. "He still comes with his army, believing me weakened by the curse. He has no idea what awaits him." "What will you do?" Arya asked, suddenly concerned by the fierce light in Alaric's eyes. The transformation of the curse had shifted something fundamental within him. He seemed more vital, more present, his considerable power no longer leashed by the fear of its consequences. "I will meet him on the field of battle," Alaric replied, "but not as the cursed king he expects. As something new, something neither of us fully understands yet." He gripped her shoulders gently, his gaze intense. "You've given me more than freedom from the curse, Arya. You've given me hope, a future for my kingdom, for my people." He hesitated, then added softly, "Perhaps even for myself." The vulnerability in those last words touched Arya deeply. This powerful Alpha King, feared throughout the realm, was allowing her to see beneath his armor, to glimpse the man who had lived so long in isolation and sacrifice. Before she could respond, a distant alarm bell began to toll. Alaric's head snapped up, his expression sharpening. "That's the outer perimeter warning," he said grimly. "Magnus's forces have been sighted earlier than expected. We need to move quickly." He seized his discarded shirt, pulling it on as he strode toward the chamber's entrance. Arya followed, her legs still unsteady from the intense energy exchange of the healing ritual. "What about your plan to send us to the temple?" she asked, anxiety for her daughters surging anew. Alaric paused, considering. "That may still be the safest course. But now—" He looked down at his hands, turning them as though seeing them for the first time. "Now, I believe I can protect you here. All of you." The certainty in his voice was compelling, yet Arya hesitated. "My daughters will be safer within these walls than anywhere else," Alaric assured her, "especially now that the curse has been transformed. Trust me, Arya, I will not fail you." As they climbed the stairs back to the upper levels of the castle, Arya felt the truth of his words in her very bones. Something profound had shifted between them in that sacred chamber, a connection forged through mutual vulnerability and shared power. Whatever came next, they would face it not as king and subject, Alpha and Omega, but as equals bound by a destiny neither had fully chosen, but both now embraced. The alarm bells continued their urgent clamor as they emerged into the royal wing. Guards rushed past, weapons at the ready. Through a window, Arya caught a glimpse of the distant plains, where countless torches marked the approach of Magnus's army. They had indeed arrived far earlier than expected, a forced march through the night perhaps, driven by Magnus's obsession. "Return to your daughters," Alaric commanded, his voice once again that of a king. "I must meet with my generals. Whatever happens in the coming hours, remember this: you are no longer alone. Neither of us is." With that enigmatic statement, he strode away, his powerful frame radiating a new kind of energy, not the isolated strength of the cursed king, but something more integrated, more whole. Arya watched him go, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else, something she had not allowed herself to feel for a very long time. Hope. The royal wing of Shadowcrest Castle had transformed into a hive of military activity. Guards and messengers rushed through the corridors as Arya made her way back to her chambers, the gravity of the situation evident in every tense face she passed. The distant alarm bells continued their ominous tolling, marking the steady approach of Magnus's army. When Arya reached her rooms, she found Aurora and Nova awake and wide-eyed with fear. The sound of the alarms had roused them from sleep, and they clung to each other on the massive bed, their small faces pale in the firelight. "Mama!" they cried in unison as she entered, scrambling across the bed to throw themselves into her arms. "I'm here, my stars," Arya soothed, holding them close. "Everything will be all right." "The bells are scary," Aurora whispered against her shoulder. "They're just a warning," Arya explained gently. "King Alaric's soldiers are protecting us." Nova pulled back slightly to study her mother's face with unusual intensity. "You're different," the child observed with that unsettling perception she sometimes displayed. "You're glowing inside." Arya blinked in surprise. Could her daughter sense the transformation that had occurred in the sacred chamber? The energy she had exchanged with Alaric still hummed through her veins, a constant reminder of their new connection. "Many things have changed tonight," she admitted, smoothing Nova's dark hair away from her face. "But all for the better, I promise you." A knock at the door interrupted any further explanations. Captain Gideon entered, his weathered face grim but composed. "Lady Arya, the king requests your presence in the war room immediately. I'll remain with the little ones until your return." Arya hesitated, reluctant to leave her daughters again so soon. "Is it safe for them to be here? With Magnus's army approaching?" "Safer than anywhere else at the moment," Gideon assured her. "The castle defenses are fully manned, and His Majesty has assigned his personal guard to this wing. No one will reach them." With a last reassuring embrace for her daughters, Arya followed another guard through the labyrinthine corridors of Shadowcrest. The war room proved to be a large chamber dominated by a massive table upon which a detailed map of the kingdom had been spread. Miniature figures represented the positions of troops and strategic fortifications. Alaric stood at the head of the table, surrounded by his generals. He had changed into formal battle attire, a fitted black tunic bearing the royal insignia over light armor, with a sword belted at his waist. Even in this gathering of powerful warriors, he stood apart, his presence commanding absolute attention. All eyes turned to Arya as she entered, conversations faltering mid-sentence. Some expressions showed curiosity, others skepticism, a few outright hostility. Clearly, her sudden importance to the king had not been explained to his military leadership. "Lady Arya," Alaric acknowledged her with a slight nod, his voice steady and authoritative. "Thank you for joining us. Gentlemen, continue your reports." A grizzled general cleared his throat, gesturing to the map. "As I was saying, Your Majesty, Magnus's forces have taken position on the eastern plain. Their numbers are greater than initially reported, closer to 700 than 500, with additional troops still arriving from the western tributaries." "And our strength?" Alaric inquired, his eyes never leaving the map. 400 within the castle walls, another 100 from the surrounding villages, skilled warriors all, but outnumbered. Arya studied the map, noting the positions marked with small wooden figures. Shadowcrest Castle occupied a naturally defensible position atop a hill, with steep approaches on 3 sides and a single accessible road from the east, exactly where Magnus had positioned his forces. "He'll attempt to starve us out," one of the younger commanders suggested. "A siege rather than a direct assault. Our walls have never been breached." "Magnus lacks the patience for a prolonged siege," Alaric countered. "He believes me weakened by the curse, vulnerable to a decisive strike. He will attack directly, and soon." "With respect, Your Majesty," another general interjected, "why would he believe that? The curse has been a constant for generations, not a growing weakness." Alaric's golden eyes, now flecked with that startling green, flickered briefly to Arya. "Because Lord Cain has fed him false information about my condition. He believes the curse has reached a critical point, that I am on the verge of total incapacitation." The generals exchanged troubled glances, the betrayal of a high counselor clearly disturbing news. Arya could sense their uncertainty, their fear that other traitors might be among them. "What of Cain now?" one asked cautiously. "He has been dealt with," Alaric replied, his tone allowing no further inquiry into the traitor's fate. "But his treachery serves us. Magnus comes expecting a weakened opponent. He will find something quite different." There was a subtle shift in Alaric's bearing as he spoke these words, a momentary flexing of the new power that now resided within him alongside the transformed curse. None of the generals could have named what they sensed, but they all straightened unconsciously, responding to the heightened authority radiating from their king. "Lady Arya," Alaric continued, turning to her directly, "I've asked you here because what happened in the sacred chamber affects our strategy. The generals need to understand what we're facing and what we've gained." Arya nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. How does one explain a mystical transformation to practical military men? "The curse that has affected King Alaric's bloodline for generations has been altered," she began carefully. "Not removed, but balanced with a counterforce. The king now commands not just the power to destroy, but also to preserve." Skepticism was evident on several faces, though none dared voice it directly. Alaric's lips curved in a slight smile, recognizing their doubt. Without a word, he extended his hand toward a pot of withered flowers that had been placed on a side table, forgotten in the preparations for war. Before the astonished eyes of his generals, the flowers began to straighten, their brown petals regaining color and form. Within moments, they stood vibrant and alive, as though freshly cut from a garden. The silence that followed was profound. The generals stared at the revitalized flowers, then at their king, understanding slowly dawning in their expressions. "The curse is broken?" the oldest among them finally asked, his voice hushed with awe. "Transformed," Alaric corrected. Through Lady Arya's intervention, I now hold both aspects of power in balance. This changes everything about our defense of Shadowcrest and about the future of our kingdom. Magnus doesn't know, Arya added, addressing the tactical implications. He comes expecting to find a dying king and a blighted land. Instead, he'll face the full strength of Alaric's power, enhanced rather than diminished. The mood in the war room shifted perceptibly. Where there had been grim determination in the face of poor odds, now a cautious hope began to emerge. If their king had indeed overcome the curse that had defined the kingdom for generations, perhaps victory was not just possible, but assured. "We should strike first," one of the younger commanders suggested eagerly. "Take the fight to them while they still believe us weakened." Alaric considered this, his expression thoughtful. "No," he decided after a moment. "Let them come to us. We hold the defensive advantage, and I want Magnus to commit fully to his assault before he discovers the truth. If we move too soon, he might retreat and regroup." He turned to his most senior general, a weathered veteran named Torval, who had served Alaric's father before him. "Position our forces according to the standard defense pattern, but hold 1/3 in reserve beneath the western wall. When Magnus commits to the eastern approach, we'll emerge behind him and cut off his retreat." "And you, Your Majesty?" Torval asked. "Where will you be during the battle?" A dangerous smile crossed Alaric's face, one that reminded everyone present that their king was not just a ruler, but a predator, an alpha wolf of extraordinary power. "I will be where Magnus least expects me," he replied cryptically. "Now make your preparations. Dawn is only hours away, and with it will come our reckoning with treason." The generals departed with renewed purpose, leaving Alaric and Arya alone in the war room. As soon as the door closed behind them, Alaric's regal posture relaxed slightly, and he ran a hand through his dark hair in a rare gesture of weariness. "You should rest," Arya suggested gently, noting the shadows beneath his eyes. "The ritual took much from both of us." "Rest will come after victory," Alaric replied, though his tone softened when he looked at her. "But you should return to your daughters. They need their mother's reassurance in these uncertain hours." "What will happen tomorrow?" Arya asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "Even with your transformed power, Magnus brings overwhelming numbers." Alaric moved closer, his golden green eyes holding hers with surprising gentleness. "Numbers are not everything in battle, Arya. Strategy, terrain, and morale often prove more decisive, and none of Magnus's forces have ever faced a king freed from his curse." "Not freed," she corrected softly. "Balanced. The curse's energy remains within you, but now in harmony with creative force rather than in opposition to it." "Balance," Alaric repeated thoughtfully. "Something I've never known until now." He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing against the fading bruises on her throat, where Varric had choked her. "These should be healed." Before Arya could respond, a warmth spread from his fingertips into her injured flesh. The pain that had lingered there vanished instantly, the discoloration fading before her eyes. Alaric looked as surprised by this development as she felt. "It seems I inherited some of your healing gift in our exchange," he murmured, examining his hand with newfound wonder. "Just as I gained some of your resilience," Arya confirmed, having noticed earlier how the usual fatigue that followed her healing work was notably less pronounced. "We truly did balance each other." The implications of this exchange hung unspoken between them. They were connected now in ways neither fully understood, their energies, perhaps even their fates, intertwined by the ancient magic they had awakened in the sacred chamber. "Your daughters," Alaric said abruptly, changing the subject. "If anything should happen to me tomorrow—" "It won't," Arya interrupted firmly. "If it does," he persisted, "Gideon has orders to see you and the girls safely to the southern kingdoms. You'll be provided for, protected." The thought of Alaric falling in battle sent an unexpected pang through Arya's heart. In the short time since their paths had crossed, he had become important to her in ways she was only beginning to recognize. "Nothing will happen to you," she repeated, this time reaching out to touch his arm. We didn't break a generational curse just for you to fall to Magnus's ambition. Alaric covered her hand with his own, that now familiar surge of energy passing between them at the contact. No, he agreed with the ghost of a smile. That would be rather anticlimactic, wouldn't it? A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Gideon entered, his expression grave. Forgive the intrusion, Your Majesty, but our scouts report unusual movement among Magnus's forces. They appear to be preparing for an immediate assault rather than waiting for dawn. Alaric's demeanor shifted instantly back to that of a warrior king. Sound the alert. All troops to their positions. He turned to Arya. Return to your chambers immediately. Gideon, assign your most trusted men to guard the royal wing. What about our plan? Arya asked urgently. If they attack now... It changes nothing, Alaric assured her. Except perhaps the timing. Go to your daughters, Arya. Keep them safe and calm. I will send word when it's over. She wanted to protest, to insist on staying with him, but the responsibility of motherhood outweighed all other concerns. With a quick nod, she hurried from the war room, making her way swiftly back through corridors, now filled with armed men rushing to their defensive positions. In their chambers, Arya found Aurora and Nova still awake, huddled together in the massive bed. They looked up with relief as she entered, their small faces brightening at her return. The scary man left, Aurora informed her, referring to Gideon. He said he had to help the king fight the bad people. That's right, Arya confirmed, sitting on the edge of the bed and gathering them close. Captain Gideon is very brave and strong. He'll help King Alaric keep everyone safe. Is the king going to fight the mean lord who hurt you? Nova asked, her perceptive eyes searching her mother's face. Yes, Arya answered honestly, seeing no point in shielding them from truths they had already intuited. Lord Magnus has brought soldiers to attack the castle, but King Alaric won't let them hurt us. I like King Alaric, Aurora declared with childish certainty. He's not scary like Lord Magnus. His eyes are nice. The simple observation brought a smile to Arya's lips. Children often saw truth more clearly than adults, unclouded by preconceptions or prejudice. To Aurora, the feared Shadow King was simply a man with nice eyes who had protected them from those who meant them harm. Yes, Arya agreed softly. His eyes are nice. From outside the window came the sounds of preparation for battle. Orders being shouted, the clatter of weapons and armor, the creaking of siege defenses being positioned. Arya moved to close the heavy curtains, hoping to muffle the ominous noises, but Nova stopped her with a small hand on her arm. Wait, the child said, pointing to the distant horizon. Look, Mama. Arya followed her daughter's gesture and gasped softly. Along the eastern edge of the blighted plains surrounding Shadowcrest, something impossible was happening. In the pale moonlight, thin tendrils of green were visibly spreading across the barren soil. Grass, wildflowers, and small saplings pushing up through earth that had been dead for generations. The land is waking up, Aurora whispered in awe. Yes, Arya breathed, understanding the significance immediately. The transformation of Alaric's curse was already affecting his kingdom, life returning to areas long thought permanently blighted. It's waking up. The sight filled her with renewed hope. If the curse's hold on the land could be broken so quickly, perhaps Magnus's hold on his allies might prove equally fragile once they witnessed the change. A commotion in the corridor outside their chamber drew Arya's attention from the miraculous view. Raised voices, the clang of metal, sounds of conflict where there should be none. Her heart raced as she ushered her daughters away from the window. Under the bed, she instructed urgently. Quickly now, and not a sound. The twins obeyed instantly, recognizing the serious tone that brooked no argument. They scrambled beneath the massive four-poster bed just as the chamber door burst open. 2 men entered, castle guards by their uniforms, but their expressions told Arya they were not here to protect. Traitors, then, like Cain. Men loyal to Magnus, who had hidden among Alaric's forces, waiting for this moment. The Omega and her brats, one snarled, his eyes fixed on Arya. Lord Magnus wants them alive. They're the key to controlling the king. Arya backed away slowly, her mind racing. The men advanced, their swords drawn but held low. They intended to capture, not kill. Her eyes darted around the room, seeking anything that might serve as a weapon. A heavy candlestick on the bedside table caught her attention, and she lunged for it, grasping it just as the first guard reached her. She swung with all her strength, connecting with the side of his head. The impact sent him staggering sideways, but he didn't fall. The second guard seized her arm before she could swing again, wrenching the makeshift weapon from her grasp. "Feisty for an Omega," he sneered, twisting her arm painfully behind her back. "No wonder Magnus wants you." "The children," the first guard growled, recovering from the blow. "Find them. They must be hiding." As he began searching the room, moving toward the bed where Aurora and Nova huddled in terrified silence, Arya felt something surge within her, the new power she had gained from her exchange with Alaric, the resilience that was the counterpart to his healing. Instinctively, she drew on it, feeling it gather in her core like a storm seeking release. With strength that surprised even her, she broke free from the guard's grip and slammed her elbow into his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping for breath. The first guard turned back at the commotion, his expression darkening with anger. "You'll pay for that," he snarled, advancing on her with clear intent to harm despite his orders. Arya stood her ground, positioning herself between the men and the bed that concealed her daughters. She might not be a trained warrior, but the maternal instinct to protect transcended all physical limitations. As the guard raised his hand to strike her, she braced herself for the blow. It never came. Instead, a blur of movement from the doorway resolved into a massive figure that collided with the guard, sending him crashing into the far wall with bone-crushing force. Where the guard had stood now loomed Captain Gideon, his sword red with fresh blood, his weathered face a mask of cold fury. "Traitors!" he spat, turning to face the second guard who had scrambled to his feet and drawn his weapon. "You disgrace the uniform you wear!" The fight was brutally brief. Despite his age, Gideon moved with the precision and power of a lifetime warrior. His sword found gaps in the traitor's armor with unerring accuracy. Within moments, both infiltrators lay dead on the chamber floor. "Are you injured, my lady?" Gideon asked, his gruff voice gentling as he turned to Arya. "No," she assured him, already moving to the bed. "Aurora, Nova, you can come out now. It's safe." The twins emerged cautiously, their eyes wide at the sight of the bodies on the floor. Gideon immediately positioned himself to block their view, a surprisingly thoughtful gesture from the stern captain. "How did they get past the guards you posted?" Arya asked, holding her daughters close. "Treachery runs deeper than we thought," Gideon replied grimly. 4 of my men were found with their throats cut. These were their replacements." He shook his head in disgust. "Magnus has been planning this for months, placing his people throughout the castle." "The king? Is he in danger?" Arya couldn't keep the concern from her voice. "His Majesty is well protected," Gideon assured her. "But this chamber is no longer secure. We must move you immediately." "Where? If Magnus has infiltrators throughout the castle—" "There is one place they cannot reach," Gideon said decisively. "The sacred chamber beneath the castle. Few know of its existence, and fewer still how to access it. It was built with old magic, a sanctuary in times of greatest need." The sacred chamber where Arya had transformed Alaric's curse. Yes, that made sense. She had felt the ancient protections there, the power that resided in the very stones. "We'll need to move quickly and quietly," Gideon continued, already moving to the door to check the corridor. "The main assault has begun. Magnus's forces are scaling the eastern wall. Most of our defenders are engaged there, which makes moving through the castle risky." Arya gathered her daughters, whispering reassurances as she helped them into their small boots and wrapped cloaks around their shoulders. "Stay close to me," she instructed, "and do exactly as Captain Gideon says." "What about King Alaric?" Nova asked suddenly. "Won't the bad men hurt him?" Gideon knelt to address the child directly, his grizzled features softening remarkably. "The king is the strongest warrior in all the lands, little one, and now he has a special power that the bad men know nothing about. He'll be just fine." The simple explanation seemed to satisfy Nova, who nodded solemnly. Gideon straightened, his hand resting on the pommel of his bloodied sword. "Ready?" With the twins between them, they ventured into the corridor. The sounds of distant battle echoed through the castle. Shouts, the clash of weapons, the occasional crash that suggested battering rams or other siege equipment. Gideon led them through service passages and narrow stairwells, avoiding the main corridors where they might encounter more of Magnus's infiltrators. Twice they were forced to hide in alcoves as groups of armed men passed by, their uniforms marking them as castle guards, but their furtive movements betraying their true allegiance. Each time, Arya held her breath, one hand over Nova's mouth, the other over Aurora's, praying they wouldn't be discovered. Finally, they reached the narrow staircase that led down to the sacred chamber. Gideon produced a key from within his armor, unlocking the ancient door at the top of the steps. "Once inside, bar the door," he instructed, handing the key to Arya. "I must return to the battle. The king will come for you when it's safe, or I will if—" He didn't complete the thought. "Be careful," Arya urged, surprising herself with the depth of concern she felt for this gruff old warrior who had shown such unexpected kindness to her children. Gideon offered a rare smile, brief but genuine. "I've survived worse odds, my lady. Keep the little ones safe. They are precious beyond measure." With that, he helped them through the door, waiting until he heard the heavy bar slide into place before his footsteps retreated up the corridor. The descent to the sacred chamber seemed longer than it had earlier that night, the stone steps steeper, the darkness more complete. Arya kept one daughter on either side, guiding them carefully downward. As they approached the chamber itself, a soft blue glow became visible, the bioluminescent fungi on the ceiling providing just enough light to navigate by. The circular room was exactly as they had left it, the altar stone at its center, the alcove pools around the perimeter filled with clear water. Aurora and Nova gasped in wonder at the ancient space, their fear momentarily forgotten in the face of such mysterious beauty. "What is this place, Mama?" Aurora asked, her voice hushed with instinctive reverence. "A very old and special place," Arya explained, leading them to a curved stone bench near one of the pools. "It was built by my ancestors, the Druids, long before Shadowcrest Castle existed. It's a place of safety and power." "It feels nice," Nova observed, running a small hand along the carved stone wall. "Like it's happy we're here." Arya smiled at her perceptive daughter. "I think it is. My people cared for this place for generations. Perhaps it remembers." As the girls explored the chamber with cautious curiosity, Arya sat on the stone bench, the exhaustion she had been fighting finally catching up with her. The events of the past days, her near sacrifice at Magnus's hands, the journey to Shadowcrest, the transformation of Alaric's curse, and now this desperate flight from traitors, had depleted her physical and emotional reserves. Yet beneath the weariness, something new and vital pulsed within her. The strength she had gained from Alaric, a resilience that went beyond mere endurance. She drew on it now, steadying herself, focusing on what mattered most, keeping her daughters safe until the battle's resolution. Above them, muffled by distance and stone, the sounds of conflict continued. Arya tried not to imagine what was happening, the clash of armies, the chaos of battle, the blood being spilled. She tried especially hard not to think of Alaric in the midst of it all, a primary target for Magnus's forces. Aurora and Nova eventually tired of their exploration and returned to her side, snuggling against her for warmth and comfort in the cool chamber. Despite the circumstances, their eyes were beginning to droop with exhaustion. "Tell us a story, Mama," Aurora requested sleepily. "A good one with a happy ending." Arya smiled, stroking her daughter's dark hair. "Once upon a time, there was a powerful king who lived in a great castle. But the king was very sad and lonely because of a curse that had been placed on his family long ago. The curse made it impossible for him to touch beautiful things without destroying them. Flowers wilted at his approach, trees died when he walked beneath them, and the land around his castle became barren and gray." Nova's eyes widened. "Like King Alaric?" "Very much like him," Arya acknowledged with a smile. Now, in a village far from the castle, lived a young woman with 2 lovely daughters. The woman had a special gift. Her touch could make plants grow and wounds heal. She used her gift to help others, but some people feared her power and drove her and her daughters from their home. "That's like us," Aurora observed drowsily. "Indeed it is," Arya continued, weaving their reality into the fairy tale. One day the cursed king found the woman and her daughters and brought them to his castle. At first they were afraid, for everyone said the king was cold and cruel. But soon they discovered that he was neither of those things. He was simply lonely and burdened by his curse. As Arya continued her story, embellishing and softening the actual events, her daughter's eyes grew heavier. By the time she reached the part where the woman helped transform the king's curse, they had drifted into sleep, their small bodies warm against hers. "And did they live happily ever after?" a deep voice asked from the chamber entrance. Arya looked up sharply to find Alaric standing there, his battle armor splattered with blood, a fresh cut across his cheek, but very much alive. Relief flooded through her with such intensity that for a moment she couldn't speak. "The battle?" she finally managed, keeping her voice low to avoid waking the girls. "Not yet decided," Alaric replied, moving into the chamber with the fluid grace that belied his size. "But the tide has turned in our favor. Magnus's forces were unprepared for what they found here." "What did they find?" Arya asked. A smile touched Alaric's lips, transforming his battle-worn features. "A kingdom awakening. As they approached our walls, the blighted plains beneath their feet began to sprout grass and wildflowers. Trees that had been dead for generations put forth new leaves. The very earth they marched across came alive." He sat beside her on the stone bench, careful not to disturb the sleeping children. "Many of Magnus's allies took it as an omen. Some have already withdrawn their forces. Others have changed sides entirely, turning on Magnus when they realized he had lied about my condition." "And Magnus himself?" Alaric's expression darkened, cornered but dangerous. "But when his initial assault failed, he retreated with his most loyal followers. They've taken control of the eastern gatehouse, using it as a defensive position. Gideon has them surrounded, but Magnus refuses to surrender." "He never would," Arya said quietly. "His pride wouldn't allow it." "No," Alaric agreed, "which is why I've come for you." Arya looked at him sharply. "For me? Why?" "Because Magnus still believes your blood is the key to claiming my power. As long as he lives, you and your daughters will be his targets. This ends only with his death, and I would have you witness it, so that no one may ever doubt his fate." The coldness in Alaric's voice reminded Arya that for all the transformation of his curse, he remained an alpha king, a predator with ancient instincts to eliminate threats to what he considered his. And somehow, against all expectations, she and her daughters had become included in that category. "What about the girls?" she asked, looking down at their peaceful faces. "I won't expose them to violence." "They'll remain here with Gideon's most trusted men," Alaric assured her. "This chamber is the safest place in Shadowcrest. No harm will come to them. I swear it." Arya carefully extracted herself from her sleeping daughters, arranging them comfortably on the bench with her cloak as a pillow. They stirred, but didn't wake, exhaustion claiming them completely. "Very well," she said, turning back to Alaric. "Let us finish this." As they ascended the stairs from the sacred chamber, leaving the twins under heavy guard, Arya felt a strange sense of completion approaching. The cycle that had begun with her near sacrifice at Magnus's hands would end with his defeat, a symmetry that seemed fitting in light of all she had learned about balance and transformation. The castle corridors were eerily quiet now, most of the fighting having moved to the eastern section where Magnus and his loyalists were cornered. Alaric led her through passages she hadn't seen before, his intimate knowledge of Shadowcrest allowing them to approach the gatehouse undetected. When they emerged onto a parapet overlooking the eastern courtyard, Arya could see the situation clearly. The massive gatehouse, a fortified structure controlling access to the castle's main entrance, was surrounded by Alaric's forces. Archers on the walls kept Magnus's men contained within, while battering rams stood ready to breach the heavy doors if necessary. "He has perhaps 30 men with him," Alaric explained, his voice low. "The most fanatically loyal, or the most deeply implicated in his treason. They know there will be no mercy if they surrender." "What will you do?" Arya asked, studying the tense standoff below. A dangerous smile played across Alaric's lips. "I will offer Magnus exactly what he has always wanted, a direct confrontation with the cursed king. Alone." "That's too dangerous," Arya protested immediately. "Even with your transformed power, he could—" "Have faith, Arya," Alaric interrupted gently, his golden-green eyes holding hers. "You restored balance to my curse. Now let me use it to restore balance to my kingdom." Before she could argue further, he stepped to the edge of the parapet and called down in a voice that carried effortlessly across the courtyard. "Magnus of Crescent Moon, your rebellion ends today. Face me in single combat, as is the ancient right of challengers to the crown. Win, and your men go free. Lose, and they share your fate." A moment of tense silence followed. Then the gatehouse door opened slightly, and Magnus emerged, older and harder looking than when Arya had last seen him, but with the same arrogant bearing, the same cruel set to his mouth. "The cursed king offers combat?" he called back, his voice dripping with contempt. "Has desperation finally overcome your cowardice, Alaric? Or do you simply wish to end your blighted existence with some semblance of honor?" "Neither," Alaric replied coldly. "I simply grow tired of the stench of treason in my kingdom. Do you accept my challenge, or will you hide behind your men like the coward you truly are?" The insult struck home. Magnus's face contorted with rage. "I accept. Clear the courtyard. No interference from either side." Alaric turned to Arya, his expression softening slightly. "Remain here. You'll be safe, and you'll witness everything." "Be careful," she urged, surprising herself by reaching out to touch his face. "He is treacherous beyond measure." Alaric caught her hand, pressing it briefly to his lips in a gesture that sent warmth flooding through her. "I know exactly what he is," he assured her, "and what he isn't." With that enigmatic statement, he turned and descended from the parapet, his powerful form moving with deadly purpose toward what promised to be the final confrontation of a conflict generations in the making. The eastern courtyard of Shadowcrest Castle fell into an eerie silence as the two alphas faced each other. On one side stood Alaric, his powerful frame relaxed yet alert, golden-green eyes fixed on his opponent with predatory focus. On the other, Magnus prowled like a caged animal, his red hair wild, eyes darting between Alaric and the surrounding forces that had him cornered. From her vantage point on the parapet, Arya could see the stark contrast between the two men. Where Alaric radiated controlled power and newfound balance, Magnus exuded desperation and unhinged rage. He had gambled everything on this rebellion, believing the cursed king to be weakened. Now, facing the reality of his miscalculation, he seemed almost manic. "Look around you, Magnus," Alaric called, his deep voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "Your allies have abandoned you. Your son lies dead. Your rebellion has failed before it truly began." "Nothing has failed," Magnus snarled back. "You're still the cursed king, the blight upon this land. Your walls may stand, but your kingdom dies a little more each day you draw breath." A murmur ran through the watching soldiers at this insult. Many had already witnessed the miraculous regrowth spreading across the blighted plains, but Magnus either hadn't seen it or refused to acknowledge its significance. Alaric merely smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "You speak of things you do not understand, as usual, but enough talk." He drew his sword, the blade gleaming in the gray morning light. "You challenged my right to rule. Now face the consequences." Magnus drew his own weapon, a heavy broadsword that matched his brute strength approach to combat. "I'll mount your head on a spike above these gates," he promised viciously, "and the Omega Witch will watch her daughters bleed before I sacrifice her to claim your power." The threat against Arya and her children was a tactical error. Alaric's expression darkened dangerously, his eyes shifting fully to the amber of his wolf form, though he remained physically human. "For those words alone, you forfeit any chance of mercy," he growled, the sound barely human. They began to circle each other, experienced warriors taking the measure of their opponent. Magnus struck first, lunging forward with a powerful overhead swing that would have cleaved a lesser man in two. Alaric sidestepped with supernatural speed, the massive blade whistling harmlessly past him. "First lesson," Alaric said coolly, not bothering to counterattack. "Rage makes you predictable." Magnus roared in frustration, launching into a series of brutal strikes, each aimed to maim or kill. Alaric evaded them all with an economy of movement that spoke of decades of battlefield experience, letting Magnus exhaust himself against the empty air. "Second lesson," Alaric continued, still not raising his sword to strike. "Strength without control is merely waste." On the parapet, Arya watched with growing understanding. This wasn't just combat, it was a demonstration. Alaric was showing everyone present, friend and foe alike, the difference between true alpha leadership and the brutish dominance that Magnus embodied. Magnus seemed to realize he was being toyed with. His attacks became more desperate, more reckless. "Fight me properly, you cursed coward!" "Very well." Alaric's response was immediate and devastating. He moved inside Magnus's guard with blinding speed, his sword a silver blur that opened a deep cut across the other alpha's chest. Before Magnus could even register the wound, Alaric had danced away again, resuming his defensive stance. Blood stained Magnus's tunic, but the wound wasn't fatal. He touched it in disbelief, then looked at Alaric with renewed hatred. "First blood to you," he acknowledged with a sneer. "But last blood will be mine." They clashed again, metal ringing against metal as their swords met in earnest combat. Magnus fought with the brutal efficiency that had made him feared among the tributary lords, each blow designed to crush through defenses by sheer power. Alaric matched him with precision and economy, his movements flowing like water around stone. For several tense minutes, neither gained a clear advantage. Then Magnus executed a feint that momentarily caught Alaric off guard. His blade slipped through Alaric's defense, scoring a shallow cut along the king's ribs. A cheer went up from Magnus's trapped followers in the gatehouse, quickly silenced by the glares of Alaric's forces. "Not so invincible after all," Magnus taunted, pressing his momentary advantage with renewed vigor. But Alaric didn't falter. If anything, the minor wound seemed to focus him further. He shifted his stance subtly, and suddenly, the dynamic of the battle changed. Where before he had been primarily defensive, now he became the aggressor, his blade weaving an intricate pattern that forced Magnus to retreat step by step. From her elevated position, Arya could see what many of the ground-level observers couldn't. Alaric was herding Magnus toward a specific position in the courtyard, a patch of ground near the wall where the morning sun fell in a particular way. It seemed an insignificant detail until she noticed something extraordinary. In that spot, impossibly, a tiny sapling had pushed through the courtyard stones, a miniature echo of the regrowth happening beyond the castle walls. It hadn't been there minutes ago. Somehow, Alaric's transformed energy was creating life even in the midst of combat. Magnus, focused entirely on survival against Alaric's onslaught, didn't notice the sapling until he was nearly upon it. His boot came down on the tender green shoot, crushing it back into the earth. The moment it did, Alaric struck with shocking ferocity. His sword blurred in a complex pattern that disarmed Magnus with surgical precision, sending the rebel's weapons spinning across the courtyard stones. Before Magnus could react, Alaric's blade rested against his throat, drawing a thin line of blood where it touched skin. "Yield!" Alaric commanded, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtyard. Magnus glared back, hatred radiating from every pore. "Never!" he spat. "Kill me if you dare, cursed king. My death will only inspire others to take up my cause." "Your cause?" Alaric raised an eyebrow, maintaining the deadly pressure of his blade. "You have no cause beyond your own ambition. You care nothing for this kingdom or its people." "I care enough to recognize a blight when I see one," Magnus retorted. "Your bloodline is poison to this land. I would have cleansed it." "Look around you, Magnus," Alaric said, his voice oddly gentle. "What do you see?" Despite himself, Magnus glanced beyond the courtyard to the plains visible through the open gates. His eyes widened in disbelief. Where blighted earth had stretched to the horizon for as long as anyone could remember, green now proliferated. Grass, wildflowers, saplings pushing up through soil that had been barren for generations. "Impossible," he whispered, momentarily forgetting the blade at his throat. "The curse has been transformed," Alaric explained, his voice carrying to all present. "Balance has been restored to my bloodline and to this land. The blight recedes even as we speak." Comprehension dawned slowly in Magnus's eyes, followed by a different kind of fear. If the curse was truly broken, his entire justification for rebellion collapsed. Worse, it meant Alaric now wielded his full alpha power without the debilitating effects that had constrained his ancestors for generations. "The Omega Witch," Magnus said, understanding at last. His gaze found Arya on the parapet. "She did this. She upset the natural order." "She restored it," Alaric corrected firmly. "The natural order was never dominance without responsibility, power without compassion, strength without wisdom. You never understood that, which is why you could never be a true alpha, let alone a king." The pronouncement fell like a death sentence. Magnus knew he was beaten, but his pride wouldn't allow him to yield. With the desperation of a cornered animal, he lunged sideways, away from Alaric's blade, rolling across the courtyard stones to where a fallen soldier's dagger lay within reach. Alaric could have ended it then, could have struck while Magnus was vulnerable. Instead, he waited, allowing his opponent to arm himself with the smaller weapon. It was a courtesy Magnus didn't deserve, but one that demonstrated Alaric's honor to all watching. "Last chance, Magnus," Alaric offered, his stance relaxed but ready. "Yield, and your life will be spared. Continue, and it ends here." For a fleeting moment, uncertainty crossed Magnus's face. Then his gaze found Arya again, and hatred rekindled in his eyes. "I'll never bow to a king who takes counsel from an Omega Witch," he snarled. "Kill me if you must, but know this. Others will rise against your perversion of the natural order. The strong must rule the weak. It is the way of our kind." "No," Alaric replied, sadness coloring his tone. "It is the way of beasts without reason. We are more than our wolves, Magnus, or at least we should strive to be." With a wordless cry of rage, Magnus charged, the dagger aimed at Alaric's heart. The king sidestepped with fluid grace, his sword meeting the attacker's momentum with perfect timing. Magnus's own forward rush impaled him on Alaric's blade, which slid between his ribs with surgical precision, piercing his heart. Time seemed to freeze. Magnus stared at Alaric in shock, blood bubbling at his lips. You've doomed us all," he gasped. "The curse cannot be broken, only transferred." "Not broken," Alaric corrected softly as he lowered his dying enemy to the courtyard stones. "Transformed, as all things must be, in their season." Life faded from Magnus's eyes, his final breath escaping in a sigh that might have been denial, or perhaps at the very end, understanding. Alaric stepped back, allowing the body to settle on the cold stone, blood pooling beneath it. A moment of absolute silence fell over the courtyard. Then, incredibly, where Magnus's blood touched the stones, tiny green shoots began to emerge, life springing from death, renewal from destruction. The soldiers nearest to the phenomenon stepped back in awe, many dropping to their knees in the presence of what could only be described as a miracle. Alaric raised his voice to address not just his own forces, but Magnus's trapped loyalists in the gatehouse. "The cycle is complete. Blood spilled in ambition has been transformed to serve life. So shall it be with this kingdom. Those who fought under Magnus's banner may now choose, pledge loyalty to the crown and receive clemency, or share your lord's fate." From the gatehouse, weapons began to clatter to the ground as Magnus's remaining followers surrendered. The rebellion was over, defeated not just by force of arms, but by the visible evidence of the curse's transformation. Arya watched from above as Alaric sheathed his sword, his face solemn but unmarked by bloodlust or triumph. This was not the reaction of a tyrant reveling in victory, but of a king who understood the burden of taking life, even when necessary. Captain Gideon approached, bowing deeply to his monarch. "Your orders, Your Majesty?" "Secure the prisoners. Tend to our wounded. Send riders to the tributary lords who stood with us. They have earned the crown's gratitude." Alaric glanced up to where Arya stood. "And prepare the great hall for an assembly. There are announcements to be made." As the courtyard bustled with renewed activity, Alaric crossed to the base of the parapet, looking up at Arya with an expression that combined weariness, relief, and something more complex, a question unasked but present in his golden green eyes. "It's over," he called up to her. "Magnus will never threaten you or your daughters again." Arya nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders that had been present for so long she had almost forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. "And his followers? Most will accept clemency. The truly dangerous ones will face justice. Either way, they pose no threat now." He extended a hand toward her in silent invitation. "Come down. It's time to begin the next chapter of this tale." She descended the narrow staircase from the parapet, emerging into the courtyard where soldiers parted respectfully to let her pass. The evidence of battle was everywhere: blood staining the stones, discarded weapons, wounded men being tended by field medics, but so too were signs of new beginnings. The tiny plants sprouting from Magnus's blood had already grown visibly, their green tendrils reaching for the sky with preternatural vigor. When she reached Alaric, he surprised her by taking her hand openly before his assembled forces. "You should rest," he said quietly, noting the shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes. "The battle is won, but much remains to be done." "My daughters," she reminded him, though she made no move to withdraw her hand from his. "Still safely in the sacred chamber. Gideon will escort us there now, if you wish." Together they made their way back through the castle, past the evidence of fighting that had spilled into the corridors during the night. Soldiers bowed as they passed, their eyes lingering curiously on the joined hands of their king and the Omega healer who had somehow changed everything. In the sacred chamber, they found Aurora and Nova awake and playing a quiet game with polished stones from one of the alcove pools under the watchful eye of 2 guards. At the sight of their mother, the twins rushed forward with cries of delight. "Mama, the nice guards showed us how to play counting stones," Aurora announced, holding up a smooth white pebble. "And we heard singing from the walls," Nova added with wide-eyed wonder, "like voices, but not voices." Arya knelt to embrace them both, breathing in their familiar scent, reassuring herself that they were truly unharmed. "I'm so glad you're safe, my stars. You were very brave." "Is the fighting over?" Aurora asked, peering around her mother at Alaric, who stood watching the reunion with an unreadable expression. "Did the king win?" "Yes," Arya assured her. "King Alaric won. The bad men can't hurt us anymore." Nova, ever the more perceptive of the twins, studied Alaric intently. "You're different now," she observed in that unnervingly direct way of hers. "Your eyes have green in them, and you're not so sad inside." A flicker of surprise crossed Alaric's face, followed by a genuine smile that transformed his stern features. "You're very observant, little one," he acknowledged, crouching to her level. "You're right. I am different now, thanks to your mother's help." "Are we staying here now?" Aurora asked hopefully. "I like the big bed in our room and the toys." Arya glanced at Alaric, uncertain how to answer. They had never discussed what would happen after the conflict ended. She had assumed they would be free to leave, but the thought no longer brought the relief it might have days ago. "That," Alaric said carefully, "is something your mother and I need to discuss. But for now, yes, you are welcome to stay as long as you wish." The answer seemed to satisfy Aurora, who returned to her game with the counting stones. Nova lingered a moment longer, her eyes moving between her mother and the king with that unnervingly adult perception, before joining her sister. "They've adapted remarkably well," Alaric observed quietly as they moved a short distance away to speak privately. "Children are resilient, but even so, their strength is impressive." "They've had to be resilient," Arya replied, a hint of old pain coloring her voice. "Life in the Omega Quarter taught them to adjust quickly to changing circumstances." A lesson they should never have needed to learn so young. Alaric's expression hardened momentarily, then softened as he looked back at the playing children. They deserve better, as do you. What happens now? Arya asked, the question encompassing far more than just their immediate future. Alaric considered his answer carefully. Now we rebuild. The kingdom will need time to adjust to the transformation. The Blight's recession will create opportunities and challenges alike, and He hesitated, something unusually vulnerable crossing his features. I find myself at a crossroads I never expected to reach. What do you mean? For my entire life, the curse defined my existence. It dictated my choices, my responsibilities, even my identity. Now that it has been transformed, I must redefine what it means to be king, what it means to be— He trailed off, searching for the right word. Whole, Arya supplied softly. Yes. His golden-green eyes met hers directly. Whole. No longer just the cursed king, destroyer of all I touch, but something balanced, capable of nurturing as well as protecting. The land will respond to that balance, Arya said with quiet confidence. Already the changes are visible. In time, Shadowcrest will bloom again. And you? Alaric asked, the simple question carrying layers of meaning. What do you wish for yourself and for your daughters now that you are truly free to choose? The question caught Arya off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. After years of having choices made for her, first by Magnus, then by circumstance, the prospect of true freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. I want safety for my daughters, she began, starting with the simplest truth. I want them to grow up knowing their worth isn't determined by their designation or their ability to please an alpha. I want them to have the education I was denied, to explore their gifts without fear. All of that can be provided here, Alaric pointed out gently. But that doesn't answer the question of what you want for yourself, Arya. What did she want? The question echoed in her mind, unexpected and profound. For so long, her own desires had been subordinated to survival and to her children's needs. To consider her own wants felt almost foreign. She began hesitantly, then found her courage. I want purpose. I want to use my gift to heal more than just physical wounds. I want to help restore balance where it has been lost. And she faltered, the last desire too personal, too vulnerable to voice aloud. Alaric waited patiently, his eyes never leaving hers. When she didn't continue, he reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and touched her face with gentle fingers. And you want? Connection, she whispered, the word barely audible even in the quiet chamber. After years of isolation, of being treated as less than whole, I want to matter to someone as more than just a means to an end. Understanding dawned in Alaric's eyes, followed by something deeper, something that made the breath catch in Arya's throat. You matter, he said simply. You have from the moment you refused to cower before me in Magnus's hall, perhaps even before that, though neither of us could have known it. The energy that connected them, that balance of opposing forces which had transformed the curse, seemed to pulse between them now, drawing them together with gentle but irresistible attraction. There is another ceremony to be performed, Alaric said, his voice low and intimate. One as ancient as the curse itself, a formal acknowledgement of what has already begun between us. If you wish it, he added quickly, I would never presume to— I wish it, Arya interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Whatever it is, I wish it. Alaric's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Then come with me. Bring your daughters. It's time the kingdom met its Luna Queen. The great hall of Shadowcrest Castle had been transformed in the hours since the battle ended. The blood had been washed from the stone floors, the broken furniture removed, the evidence of conflict erased as much as possible. Now, banners hung from the rafters, their midnight blue fabric emblazoned with a new crest, the traditional wolf head of Shadowcrest, but with a background of silver stars and green vines, symbolizing the transformation of the kingdom. The hall was filled to capacity with those who had fought to defend the castle: soldiers, nobles, servants, and civilians from the surrounding villages who had taken shelter within the walls. All stood in respectful silence as Alaric entered, clad not in his battle armor, but in formal regalia befitting a coronation. Behind him came Captain Gideon, bearing a cushion upon which rested a circlet of silver intertwined with living vines, a crown unlike any the kingdom had seen before. Alaric took his place before the ancient throne, facing the assembled crowd. "People of Shadowcrest," he began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly to the farthest corners of the hall. "Today marks not just the end of a rebellion, but the beginning of a new era for our kingdom." He gestured to the windows, where sunlight, true, golden sunlight, not the perpetual gray gloom that had shadowed the land for generations, streamed in. The curse that has blighted our realm for centuries has been transformed. Already, life returns to the barren plains. Trees that have stood as skeletons since before your grandparents were born put forth new leaves. The rivers run clear again. A murmur of wonder passed through the crowd. Many had seen the evidence with their own eyes, but to hear it confirmed by the king himself made the miracle real in a new way. "This transformation was not achieved through violence or dominance," Alaric continued, his gaze sweeping the hall. "It came through balance, through the recognition that true strength lies not in destruction, but in the harmony between opposing forces." He turned toward the entrance of the hall and extended his hand. "And it would not have been possible without the courage, wisdom, and sacrifice of one who has proven that designation does not determine destiny." All heads turned as Arya entered, flanked by her daughters. She wore a gown of midnight blue that matched the new banners, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, adorned with tiny white flowers. Aurora and Nova walked beside her, dressed in smaller versions of the same elegant attire, their eyes wide at the spectacle before them. A collective gasp went through the assembly. For most present, this was their first glimpse of the woman rumored to have broken the king's curse, the Omega healer who had somehow accomplished what generations of mages, scholars, and warriors had failed to achieve. As Arya approached the throne, she felt hundreds of eyes upon her. In the past, such scrutiny would have made her shrink into herself, trained by Magnus to be invisible, unremarkable. But now she walked with her head high, drawing strength from the new resilience that flowed through her veins. Alaric's gift to her, just as she had gifted him healing. When she reached Alaric, he took both her hands in his, the gesture intimate despite their public setting. "Arya of the Druid bloodline," he said, his voice pitched for all to hear, yet somehow still intimate. "You came to Shadowcrest as a tribute, became its healer, and transformed its curse. Now I ask you to take one more role, as my mate, my equal, my Luna Queen." Though she had anticipated something like this from his words in the sacred chamber, the formal declaration before the entire court still took Arya's breath away. She was acutely aware of Aurora and Nova watching with wide eyes, of Captain Gideon's approving nod, of the hundreds of witnesses whose attitudes toward Omegas had been shaped by generations of prejudice. Yet in Alaric's golden-green eyes, she saw only certainty, respect, and something deeper that made her heart race. The connection between them, that perfect balance of opposing energies, hummed like a plucked string, resonating through her very bones. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Not as a tribute or subject, but as your equal partner in creating the balance this kingdom needs." A smile of genuine joy transformed Alaric's stern features. He turned to Gideon, who stepped forward with the living crown upon its cushion. Unlike traditional coronets of metal and gems, this one seemed almost alive, silver strands interwoven with vibrant green vines that continued to grow even as they watched, tiny white flowers budding along its length. "This crown was crafted in the sacred chamber," Alaric explained to the assembly. "From silver of the ancient mines and living plants nurtured by the Queen's touch, it symbolizes the new balance of our realm, strength and nurturing in perfect harmony." He lifted the crown, holding it above Arya's head. "Kneel if you wish, or stand as my equal," he said softly, for her ears alone. "The choice is yours, now and always." Arya remained standing, her eyes level with his. "Equals," she affirmed quietly. With gentle hands, Alaric placed the living crown upon her head. The moment it settled against her hair, a visible pulse of energy passed between them, the same harmonious resonance that had transformed the curse, now binding them in a more personal covenant. "Rise, Queen Arya of Shadowcrest," Alaric proclaimed, though she had never knelt. "Luna Queen, healer of the blight, mother of the new balance." As the assembly erupted in cheers, hesitant at first, then swelling to fill the hall, Alaric drew Arya closer, one arm encircling her waist, while his other hand beckoned Aurora and Nova forward. "And these," he announced as the twins stepped shyly to their mother's side, "are Princesses Aurora and Nova, first daughters of the new royal line. They will be educated in both the warrior traditions of their Alpha heritage and the healing arts of their Druid ancestry, embodying the balance that will define our future." The twins' eyes widened at the pronouncement. "We're princesses now?" Aurora whispered in awe. "Real ones, with crowns and everything?" Nova added, looking up at her mother's living circlet. "Real ones," Arya confirmed softly. "But more importantly, you're children who will never again have to fear being valued only for your designation or gender. You're free to become whatever your hearts and minds lead you to be." As the formal ceremony concluded, Alaric led his new family onto the great balcony overlooking the kingdom. From this vantage point, the transformation was even more evident than it had been hours earlier. The blighted plains were now visibly green, with patches of wildflowers creating splashes of color across the landscape. In the distance, the skeletal forest had begun to leaf out, a haze of pale green softening its previously harsh silhouette. "It's happening so quickly," Arya marveled, leaning against the stone balustrade. "I never imagined the land would respond with such speed." "It has been waiting for centuries," Alaric replied, standing close beside her. "Just as I was waiting, though I didn't know it." Aurora and Nova had discovered a small bird's nest in a newly sprouted vine climbing the castle wall and were watching in fascination as the mother bird fed her chicks. "Look, Mama," Nova called excitedly, "life is coming back everywhere." "Yes, my star," Arya agreed, her heart full as she watched her daughters, now princesses, engaging with the natural world without fear. "Life finds a way, even in the most unlikely places." Alaric's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against his side. "Like an Omega healer finding her strength in the depths of persecution," he murmured, "or a cursed king discovering balance in his darkest hour." Arya turned to face him fully, reaching up to trace the lines of his face with gentle fingers. The face that had once seemed so stern and forbidding to her now revealed its true nature, strength tempered by compassion, power balanced with wisdom, the warrior and the healer in one. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing her question from earlier. "Now," Alaric replied, his golden-green eyes reflecting the renewed life spreading across his kingdom. "We write our own story, not as the cursed king and the outcast Omega, but as equals bound by choice rather than circumstance." He glanced at the twins, who were still absorbed in watching the nesting birds. "And we ensure that the next generation never knows the prejudice and isolation that shaped our pasts. They will inherit a kingdom of balance, where strength protects rather than dominates, where healing is valued as highly as fighting, where designation determines neither worth nor destiny." The sun emerged fully from behind the clouds that had shrouded Shadowcrest for generations, bathing the balcony in warm golden light. In that moment, with her daughters nearby and Alaric's steady presence beside her, Arya felt something she had nearly forgotten how to recognize: happiness. Not the temporary relief of danger averted or pain postponed, but true, sustainable joy rooted in connection, purpose, and belonging. "I would like that story," she said softly, leaning into Alaric's embrace. "Let us write it together." As if in response to her words, a flock of birds, absent from Shadowcrest's skies for as long as anyone could remember, soared past the balcony, their wings catching the sunlight as they circled the castle towers. Aurora and Nova gasped in delight at the sight, their faces upturned to follow the bird's flight. From the reawakening forests came the distant sound of wolves howling, not in hunger or aggression, but in celebration, ancient voices acknowledging the return of balance to their domain. Alaric's eyes gleamed amber for a moment as his wolf responded to the call of his wild kin. "The pack recognizes its Luna Queen," he explained, the proud smile he directed at Arya containing centuries of alpha tradition refashioned into something new and equal. "As do I." In the courtyard below, soldiers and civilians alike had emerged to witness the kingdom's transformation firsthand. Many knelt in the grass that now pushed through cracks in the ancient stones, touching it with wonder as though unable to believe their eyes. Others wept openly, overcome by the sight of flowers blooming where only death had existed for generations. Captain Gideon appeared at the balcony entrance, bowing deeply to both monarchs. "Your Majesties, the tributary lords who remained loyal during the conflict have arrived. They request an audience." Alaric nodded, his arms still around Arya's waist. "We will receive them together," he decided. "Let them see from the start that Shadowcrest now has two rulers of equal authority." As they turned to re-enter the castle, Arya paused for one last look at the transformed landscape stretching to the horizon. In the distance, where Magnus's retreating allies had scattered during the night, thin columns of smoke rose from campfires. Not everyone would accept the new order immediately. Change, even positive change, always met resistance. But the fundamental balance of power had shifted. The curse's transformation was visible proof that the old ways were not immutable. With each passing day, as the blight receded further and life returned to Shadowcrest, that evidence would become increasingly difficult to deny. "Ready?" Alaric asked, noting her momentary hesitation. Arya took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders beneath the weight of the living crown. The girl who had cowered in the Omega Quarter, the woman who had been valued only for her ability to bear sons, was gone, transformed just as surely as Alaric's curse. "Ready," she confirmed, her voice steady with newfound certainty. Then, calling to her daughters, "Aurora, Nova, come. It's time to meet our people." As the royal family walked together into the great hall to face the future they would create, the living crown upon Arya's head continued to grow, tiny tendrils reaching toward the ceiling's ancient beams, and everywhere they passed, in their wake, life flourished where once there had been only shadow and decay. The Shadow King and his healing Omega had found their balance at last, and with them so too would their kingdom.